It's Cinemassacre's Audio Slaughter.
Hey, this is James, and this is Mrs.
Hello.
And we have a baby.
She's technically a guest on this podcast, sleeping away behind us.
So, what is this that stands before me? Those were the words that changed the course of music history. On Friday the 13th of February 1970, Black Sabbath released their debut album and paved the way for a constantly evolving genre of heavy music that today would be known as metal. All metal bands today owe something to Black Sabbath. They are the forefathers, the masters, the Dark Lords, and 43 years after that debut album, they're still reinforcing their power with a new album, 13. The first studio album to feature 3/4 of original members since 1983's Born Again, and the first to feature Ozzy Osbourne on vocals since 1978's Never Say Die. We weren't even born then.
No.
So this isn't just an album, this is like an event.
Yeah. I haven't seen you this excited in a long time. You were literally like a little kid on Christmas when we listened to the first 8 tracks the other night.
Yeah, they just put the the stream on iTunes, and now the album is out today when you're hearing this.
Yeah.
And we get to hear the other 4 songs.
Cool.
Well, the Best Buy version has an extra song.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
It's very complicated.
I
There's
mean,
like
I know
many
that
different
in this
versions.
day and age, like, you gotta do what you can to entice people to buy, like, the physical
Yeah.
CD and all that stuff, but man, it's friggin' complicated.
Yeah, like what's the deal with exclusives?
Well,
I mean,
like, to keep people buying CDs when in a world of digital downloads, but
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing like all the different things. They have the free streaming, they've got digital downloads, you've got the CD, you got a different CD from Best Buy versus other places. It's just like,
Yeah,
how many different things can you collect?
It's even out on vinyl. But we're going to talk about that album, but first we're going to talk about who Black Sabbath is, why they're interesting as a band, sort of a 101 kind of thing, and we'll talk briefly about each of their albums one by one, go through their whole history, and then we're going to talk about our concert experiences, recommendations, and finish it off with our top 5 guitar players.
Yeah.
And sorry if I dominate this podcast because I've been legitimately obsessed with this band for 15 years now. And everything I've always wanted to say about Sabbath, I'm just going to pour it all out. I've been wanting to do something about Black Sabbath on the site for years now. So this is the best time to do it.
Yep. He's going to blow his Sabbath load all over your ears.
So actually, really quick, let's just talk about anything recent that happened. I just got the Blu-ray for Judas Priest Epitaph. It was a recording of their last concert on their last tour. And Richie Faulkner, where did they find this guy? He is amazing on guitar. There are some amazing guitar solos. This was for the first time. I don't think I minded that they have a new guitarist now.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine Priest without KK, but
It was impossible to imagine.
with the little bit that I've heard, it's okay,
Yeah, he's really a great replacement, and it's a great Blu-ray.
It's
Probably
smart of them to go with an unknown too a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
if you're gonna replace a huge presence like KK, you could either go one or two ways. You pick an unknown, and let him just kind of fill the shoes, or you pick somebody who's like try to outdo KK, find somebody who's like even better.
Or you get one of these guitar vagabonds like Slash or Buckethead that play in lots of different things. But
I think it was the right way to go. Is my point.
But anyway, I think it's the best live recording of a Priest concert that I've seen in a long time. And I hear they're coming out with a new album by the end of the year, maybe. So that's going to be exciting. I've been waiting for that.
Cool.
So anyway, actually, as we're recording this, the Orion Fest is going on right now in
those of you in Detroit, you
Yeah.
lucky bastards.
And I just heard that they're playing tonight, and I guess yesterday they had some surprise concert in the middle of the afternoon.
Oh, really?
They had a band going on called Dehan or something like that, and it was actually Metallica undercover, and they played the entire album of Kill 'Em All. Isn't that
That's
amazing?
depressing. Well, I mean,
Well,
it's
it's depressing
amazing.
we're not there, but for anybody who went, Let us know how that was, because
Yeah,
that
it's
sounded...
fucking cool.
Yeah. Megadeth just came out with a new album last week, Super Collider. I gotta admit, I was not ready for it. It just came out of nowhere. I was like,
Well, I
oh,
kind of knew about it. I just wasn't. I didn't know it. I don't know what the hell day it is anymore with the baby and
I
stuff. So
know.
it's like I didn't realize we were already in June kind of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
there it is. But I did know it was coming out.
Yeah,
just
I
didn't know
feel
we
like their last one just came out, and they've been on tour like crazy.
Yeah.
Like they come around here like 3 times a year. So I wasn't really ready for this album, and I was too excited about Black Sabbath to really get into it that much. But I read a lot of negative reviews about it. It seems like the whole internet is shitting on it, saying it's
Jim Florentine likes it. He tweeted that.
cool, awesome. Well, that's the first positive I heard, because I've heard like people have said it's like the worst one since Risk, or that it's their worst one ever, and I
Really?
almost didn't even buy it, and then I did, and I was like, okay, what the hell are people talking about? This is actually pretty good. Like, I can understand that the single that they picked, Super Collider, is more like a hard rock song. It's not a metal song.
Yeah.
And a lot of the albums
So?
like that. Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of heavy songs on it. Listen to Built for War or Don't Turn Your Back. Those are heavy songs. And there's some amazing guitar solos on it. Listen to the solo on Off the Edge or Dance in the Rain. I would say especially Dance in the Rain. Listen to the solo on that part. It gets me pumped up.
Why don't you save that for the Megadeth podcast when we eventually get to them?
Yeah, that's the thing. I could completely I could keep going with this, but we need to get on to Sabbath. Last thing, Gigantor is going on. I hope I can go to that this year, but I don't think we're going to make it. Jason Newsted is on that one.
Yeah.
And speaking of Jason Newsted, he's been kicking ass lately. He just came out with a new EP called Metal, and I really love Jason in interviews and stuff. We just saw him on that Metal show.
Yeah.
Jason
Which
Newsted's
just started up June 1st if you're not watching. They don't pay me, by the way. I just genuinely love that show.
We don't, it's not an official endorsement. We just love talking about it, because it is that metal show, because what other metal show is there?
Anyway, I just realized I constantly talk about them, and they don't pay me. They should, but they don't.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Newsted is a very charismatic guy. I really love him in interviews, and we're going to see Weird Al Yankovic tonight.
Yeah.
That's
my first show
out
out of the motherhood gate, and that's what I'm going to see. But
first show, we're getting out of the house tonight. Wow.
got a babysitter. We're not leaving her by herself.
And Weird Al, I've seen him before. He puts on a great show. All right, so when it comes to heavy music, there is no band more distinguished and influential than Black Sabbath. They're the first metal band, but they're not really the first metal band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean they forged the path for metal.
They did. They're proto-metal. It's a complicated topic. Mm-hmm. They've never embraced that label themselves. Kind of like Led Zeppelin. They don't like it when people ever say anything they do is metal. But, they're a hard rock band like Deep Purple and Zeppelin, which all make up the Holy Three. Mm-hmm. But Sabbath was different from those other two because they took a darker turn. All the music that was around at the time was all happy, flower power, hippie stuff. Mm-hmm. But they grew up in an area of Birmingham, England, surrounded by crumbling buildings from World War II. So they didn't exactly have wealthy upbringings, and they looked around and said, well, the world doesn't seem so happy from where we're at. So they were the first band to really speak so truthfully of the darker side of life.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely reflected in their music and their lifestyles. They grew up in this vicious cycle of working yourself to death in factories and being just genuinely miserable out of alcoholism and everything you can read about in Ozzy's book and I'm sure in Naomi's book. It was just if it was a downtrodden kind of way of life, and that reflected in their music and, permeated into their interests in horror films and the occult, and then that all kind of got into the music and created this dark, heavy, mystical type sound that became...
And they were never serious about the occult stuff. It was always just part of the, the act.
It was like, ooh, this is like dark looking, and it's kind of reflects how I feel a little bit, but I don't know what it means. you know, kind of that sort of thing.
I guess sort of like in high school, where you like darker things and horror. Like I love horror movies and just darker things because that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
I guess so. You kind of externalize it somehow. And with heavy music, you can trace it back much further. They took inspiration from blues and classical music, and they just threw it all together into one big melting pot. But what they did was so drastically different than anything else of the time. It's like a black stripe on a rainbow. Deep. So every metal band was forged in the same fire that Black Sabbath had started. Even punk rock. Paranoid was like the first punk rock song. It's simple to play on guitar. It's fast. It's aggressive. And then, later there's been thrash metal, power metal, industrial metal, death metal, hair metal. It all branched out from what Sabbath had started. Also, when you listen to Sabbath, it doesn't sound like they're trying too hard. It sounds like they got together, they played the music, and that's what came out.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a very spontaneous kind of sound and experimental and just kind of being goofy and not necessarily all, they're dark as well, but there's like this goofy element to what they're doing. They had nothing to lose. They were young. As we said before, they're from this shithole of a place, and it's either that or go work in the factory until you're dead. So it was just kind of like...
Or lead a life of crime.
Or lead a life of crime.
You become a criminal or you become...
But they had nothing to lose, so as they're putting balls to the wall, laying it all out on Front Street, and as a result, there's a lot of different sounds and spontaneity in the music that ended up being what it was.
You'd hear harmonicas, you'd hear keyboards, maybe synthesizers, maybe even an orchestra. They just threw it all in and just tried whatever, Sabbath for me is all about the riffs. You'll hear me talk about that a lot, that there's no band that has such amazing riffs going on, and that's all because of Tony Iommi. His guitar sound is probably the best sound that ever existed. I don't think any guitar player has matched his power. All you need to hear is one chord, and it's a distinct sound. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I do.
And I can point to some facts that play a part in his signature sound. Well, for one thing, he was a left-handed guitar player, which isn't that uncommon. Next, he cut off his fingers, his two middle fingers.
A lot of people know this story of how, right before he was about to quit his job for good, he got into an accident at the factory that cut off his two middle fingers.
It was his last day on the job.
Yeah, I mean, talk about...
He has this conveyor belt cutting sheets of metal on it, and then...
Yeah, it cut off the tips of his two middle fingers on his fret hand. You talk about perseverance, he could have just given up and been like, well, fuck, this is the end of my music career, but instead he decided to melt down some plastic and create these homemade prosthetics to put on his fingers and down-tune his guitar. I mean, I don't know the musical, whole deal about it, but I know
I'll get to that.
Yeah, I'm sure James will explain it. But he down-tuned his guitar so the strings weren't so hard on his damaged fingers, and as a result, there is a specific Tony Iommi sound, because of this accident. So it was kind of, I'm sure in the moment he wasn't thinking it was going to shape his life, but it kind of was actually probably the best thing that ever happened to him.
So he made these homemade thimbles over his missing fingers, and the next thing, he altered his guitar. So what he did was he needed to get the strings closer to the neck of the guitar, so he filed the frets down. And still, when he would press his, these thimbles against these strings, it hurt like hell, and he had to press real hard or else the strings would flick off, so they wouldn't stay pressed down. So basically what he did was he invented lighter gauge strings. But what he did the first time, basically, how the strings on a guitar, they get thinner as they go, they go up. So basically, he took off the thickest strings, and then he moved the rest of the strings down. So basically what he has now is all thinner strings, but he still needed two at the end, which is the B and the high E. So what he did was he got banjo strings, and that's what he used. So he's playing half, mostly guitar strings and then these banjo strings. So, and after that, more people started making lighter gauge strings. So he also invented that. And then, of course, you mentioned already he downtuned the guitar, but he didn't do that until the third album. But that is a big sound of that album and a lot of their future music, that it has this deeper, heavier sound. And so that's
What
Iommi.
balls does it take to do that, man? Be like, well, I mean, it's happened a few times throughout rock history, but be like, I've got an injury, so I'm going to completely change this instrument so that I can play it.
Yeah.
Like, instead of just, like, you got to have balls to do something like that. It's a little bit like a Rick Allen type thing of, I don't have an arm, but I still want to play
Def
drums.
Leppard.
So that's, like, pretty cool. Anyway.
Yeah. So that's Iommi. I mean, we could talk about him forever, but
Well, I mean, I think it's important to mention, if we're going to talk about Iommi, that he is the backbone of Sabbath as well. Like, as far as all the different incarnations of the band, he's kind of the consistent factor.
Iommi is Black Sabbath.
Amen.
Because there's been so many changes, he's always been the constant member and the unofficial leader of the band from the beginning. Bill Ward is a beast on the drums, and we could talk about him forever too, but one of the things that I always found funny was...
we definitely thought this was probably the funniest part of Ozzy's book, is when...
One of the funny parts. There's
the whole
several
thing
funny
is
parts.
hilarious, but this
book, I Am
just
Ozzy,
illustrates Bill Ward very nicely, is that he would have, every morning at breakfast, he would have orange juice, milk, beer, and a coffee. And Ozzy talks about the different reasons of why he has each of these different beverages. And maybe I kind of thought this was funny because I tend to do the same thing. I don't drink beer first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I drink all the rest in the morning. Yeah,
basically, I just have like a liquid morning
liquid morning.
Yeah, and so Bill says you need the milk to coat your stomach, you need the coffee to wake you up, you need the orange juice for the vitamins, and a beer to get you going for the rest of the day.
Or to put him to sleep, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about that book a lot. I Am Ozzy, Ozzy's autobiography. Yeah. Another thing about Bill Ward that I've heard is that he smoked banana skins. Who smokes banana skins?
Yeah, I mean, like, what makes you... There's, like, lots of different things in your cupboard that you could look through and be like, yeah, that's smokable. But banana skins just doesn't look like something.
Yeah. Geezer Butler on bass. He was the main lyricist in the band, known for dressing real strangely. He had a fascination with black magic and witchcraft. But like I said, none of them ever took that real serious.
Yeah, he was kind of the one who brought that all in, the occult stuff. But, like, none of them were...
They were actually superstitious.
Practicing of it. They just, like you said, they're superstitious. Just thought it was a neat... I feel this way about a lot of things where it's like, I don't necessarily believe it, but I think it's clever and neat and like not necessarily clever, but it's just... You get fascinated by shit, no matter if you believe it or not, kind of thing.
There was a story one time where a bunch of actual cult members show up at their hotel room because they would try to recruit them or whatever, and they show up in these robes and have all these candles, and they opened up their hotel room and they saw all these guys with these candles, so they sang Happy Birthday and then blew them all out. Now, Ozzy Osbourne, what can you say? Like, we could have an entire podcast about him. Yeah. Very unique voice. There's nobody that sounds like him. Well, people have tried since, but there's only one Ozzy. Yeah. And besides his voice, his live, performances, he was one of the first front men to, use street language on stage. Like, he wouldn't just say, hey, hope you're all having a good time. He would say, everybody get off your fucking asses and go crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely... Ozzy gives 110%. He always has, and he still does, even half dead and whatever he is.
Even if his voice is going out sometimes.
And I mean, he talks about it in his book, too, and it's completely apparent that he just never felt like he deserved any of this, and so he every show feels like he still has to prove that he's good enough to be in the band, you know, and it shows. He gives 110%. He tries different things. He's a crazy motherfucker, and
Yeah, and his off-stage personality, he he's basically like some kind of freak of nature because he's cheated death like thousands of times.
yeah.
He's had an addictive nature where, booze, coke, acid, heroin, like if you could sniff it, if you can drink it or smoke it, like he's done it.
Mm-hmm.
He's done everything. He's immune to drugs. The doctors can't even put him out when they try to do surgery on him. Just to give you an idea of a typical day Ozzy used to have, from his book on page 174, I'm reading right from the book here. I've been up all night, a lockin' at the Hand and Cleaver, the bar, followed by more boozing at home, then a few toots of coke, then some dope, then some more coke, then a blackout around breakfast time to refresh myself, then some coke to wake me up again. By then it was time for lunch, so I had a bottle of cough syrup, 3 glasses of wine, some more coke, a joint, half a packet of cigarettes, and a Scotch egg. How do you go through life like that?
Is that the only thing he ate too? Was a Scotch egg?
I guess.
Yeah, I don't. I've said it before. I don't even know how these people function, let alone make the best music ever. You know, it's like,
How is he not dead?
yeah, how is he not dead? And then to go and like be able to sing, I'd be like, you know, like it just.
He's not even like a real human being. He's like like I said, a freak of nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, they've actually had like studies on him. Like medical scientists have actually like done studies on Ozzy to like study the addiction and whatnot. But
And as far as we go with Ozzy stories, it could go on and on and on and
yeah, we
on.
can do a whole podcast on Ozzy
and
stories.
we're focusing on the Sabbath side. We're not going to go into his solo career. But during his solo career, he did some pretty insane stuff. Everybody talks about the bat incident, but the dove incident was probably the craziest one of all, where he was in a room with a bunch of like record company
Yeah, like
executives
executives.
and business people, and they were signing some contract, making some kind of deal, and they brought these doves in a cage as some kind of like like symbol of friendship, so they let the doves loose, and Ozzy was so out of his mind, he just grabbed one of these doves and just bit its head right off in front of all these business people.
I mean,
And there's a
that's
picture of-
horrible for the dove. Let me go on record.
I know,
saying,
it
like,
is.
You know, I support animal rights.
And there was a lot of, he got into a lot of shit from it, but there's this picture of it, and there's like almost like a little sequence of pictures where you could almost see the aftermath of what happened. He's
Stop motion.
He's holding the headless dove, and he's like grinning with his eyes wide open and with like blood trickling down his chin. He's a fucking maniac. But with that said, they were all fucked up. They were pranksters. They were extremely notorious for getting into all kinds of trouble. And, there's too many stories to go through the whole thing. But probably the most famous that I can think of is when they set Bill Ward's beard on fire. And he usually became the victim of some kind of joke. They were all characters, and I think they should make a movie about Black Sabbath.
Yeah, like when you should make a movie about Black Sabbath.
I've been wanting to for like, geez, at least 15 years now
that
since.
would be wonderful.
Robert Downey Jr.
I
as
produce that.
Tony Iommi.
Who would play the rest of them?
I mean,
That
I'm not
takes
gonna.
some thought.
It would take some thought, and I'm not going to get into a whole casting thing. But for some reason, Robert Downey Jr. pops out as
He's
Tony
gotta
Iommi.
be in that movie. Ideal.
I mean, Tony Stark and Tony Iommi have a lot of similarities. They both had
He
injuries
is
that
Iron Man.
they're both Iron Man. Yeah, but both had injuries that they've
Yeah.
like self repairs done to themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Deep.
But anyway, I'm not going to get into it all now. So anyway, that's just the Ozzy era. We just talked about the 4 classic members.
Mm-hmm.
But there were several lineups of Black Sabbath. They've all done their own solo material, every one of them. But Iommi always kept the Sabbath machine going, even though he had to keep changing out the parts on a regular basis. You have bands like Led Zeppelin that break up after the loss of their drummer. But with Black Sabbath, the motto was always never say die. keep on going. And that's what made them so interesting to me, was that they're such an unstable band that you get the sense that it could all come unhinged at any moment. But in the midst of all that, they made some fantastic music. And with each new singer, it brought a new, fresh style to the band. So we're going to talk about Dio and Ian Gillan and all the great singers that have been in Sabbath, but I'm not going to mention every single drummer and every single bassist, because trying to name every person who was ever in Black Sabbath is like trying to name every bone in the human body. And if I knew every bone in the human body, that might actually be more useful.
But we don't. We could go get your skeleton to help us.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to go through all their albums and talk about them one by one, as well as any side history going on. But before we talk about the debut album, let's talk about their name changes and everything that happened before they were called Black Sabbath. You know what their first name was?
Polka Tulk.
Polka Tulk. It was a name of a talcum powder that Ozzy saw on a shelf while he was taking a shit. So he describes in the book, it's like, he says that in between like the time it took from the shit to leave his ass and hit the toilet, he looked up and saw his mom's like ass powder or whatever, and goes, oh, that's what we should call a band, Polka Tulk. And I would love, like, does anybody have that can of Polka Tulk? Because that's history right there.
Yeah.
That would be the ultimate Sabbath collectible, to have that powder.
Clearly it was an English product, because I've never heard of it.
It's
I don't know,
probably
maybe it's
outdated as well,
Yeah.
but I would love to just see. I can't even find a picture of it. I've looked. I just want to see what this Polka Tulk, because when he in his book, when he says he brings it up to the rest of the guys in the band and says, I got the name Polka Tulk. They just thought he was crazy, and they're like, what, that polka dotted can? Like, they all knew what it was. Like,
Okay.
they it was like a
It wasn't
brand
a hallucination.
No, yeah, like they all knew instantly what it was, and they were like, why are we going to call it that? And he's like, well, you guys got a better name?
Yeah.
And nobody said anything. So Polka Tulk it was. And it's funny, the idea of naming a band, if you think about it, it's such a trivial, stupid thing, but you have to call the band something. So I wonder how many...
Well, some bands take it like real serious, and,
Yeah.
and they like come up with something that's like really meaningful. Like we just watched the Behind the Music of Foreigner, and I thought that was like a really like deep reason they called it Foreigners, because half of them were English, half of them were American, so they're foreigners somewhere.
They're always a
a foreigner somewhere. That's like deep shit.
Yeah.
But then you've got this, which is like just some talcum powder, or like...
There's so many ways you can go with a band name. Like, I was in a band one time, and it was just like, it was a constant struggle to agree on a name, because we all had different ways we wanted to go with it. Like, some people wanted it to be this deep thing, and I've always just felt like, well, unless you're a really important band, it's like nobody cares that much about the name. Nobody's going to know the whole story behind the name, so just call it something that catches your attention.
Yeah.
Then they changed the name to Earth. And they found out that there was another band named Earth, because they showed up to one of the gigs one time and found out that, you know, the people who booked the gig booked the wrong Earth. And they thought it was going to be like some kind of jazz band or something. And then they come out and they're playing this like doomy, heavy music, and they're like, what's going on here? So then after that, they decided, okay, it's time to come up with another name. And there was a movie playing at the time. It was Black Sabbath, starring Boris Karloff, and they decided to call the band Black Sabbath.
Which I can't imagine them being called anything else, but...
It's very hard,
And that
yeah.
happens with everything, but it just is so befitting.
They decided that, you know, they saw people were going to these movies to get scared, and they thought, why not make scary music? So it was very fitting.
I think that's why they appeal to you so much, is it's like music's version of a horror movie, of a classic monster film.
It is. It's very visionary music. You can see images in your head when you're listening to it. And another thing about these early days of Sabbath, which is, it's very hard to imagine, but imagine just being in a bar watching Black Sabbath. Like nowadays, it's a big deal. When they come around,
Yeah.
it's not often, and it's in an arena, and it's a huge, huge deal to see Sabbath in concert. But back then, they were basically bums. They were just, um, a,
Well,
a,
most of our favorite bands started out that way.
yeah, it's true. But they used to go around to bars waiting for their opportunity when the band wouldn't show up. So
Yeah.
they would go to a bar, and if the band doesn't show up, then they would go on
We'll
and
play,
play.
we'll play.
Exactly. And they would drive all around, and they didn't have money for gas sometimes, so
Petrol.
sometimes petrol, yeah. So one time, Ozzy had to suck the gas out of a parked car, like with
So he stole gas. He siphoned
he
stole gas
he
out of
siphoned it
someone.
out and would sometimes swallow the gas.
Well, yeah. You run that risk when you're siphoning gas
Yeah.
from a car that's not yours.
And now we move on to Black Sabbath, 1970. This was their first album.
Let me just interject. You should see the shit-eating grin on James's face right now. He is...
Oh, what?
He is a kid in a candy store. This is, like, making him very happy.
Oh, is
Anyway, go on.
Okay. I don't even know where to begin with this. It has a very bluesy sound.
Well, that makes sense. They were influenced by the blues and American blues at the time.
Yeah, it's still evolving. Like they didn't get quite to the point yet where you would call it metal.
Yeah.
Although it is very heavy. The title track sounds like a horror movie. That's really the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I describe it. It sounds like a horror movie put to
Yeah.
song,
The
know.
lyrics are like something Edgar Allan Poe would write.
Mm-hmm.
Then the wizard has a harmonica on it.
Yeah, that's arguably one of my favorite Sabbath songs.
NIB is basically like a love song between the devil and
Yeah,
a mortal
and
woman.
like, isn't there some story about it being called NIB because Bill
Yeah.
Ward's beard looked like a pen nib?
Yeah.
Must be an English phrase because I don't know what a nib.
They didn't know what to call it, so they just said, let's call it NIB. They made it look like it was an acronym for something,
Yeah.
NIB, and it really meant nib, but everybody thought it like, oh, it must mean nativity in black or something.
Something dark.
The Warning, I think, is the song that sums up the album for me. For some reason, that's the one that I think of because it just sounds very improvisational. It's a long song, and there's lots of guitar soloing over it. And there's supposedly a longer cut of the solo somewhere. Like it was originally the whole track was supposed to be like 15 minutes or something. And on the album you hear 10 minutes. So
Interesting.
there's been different lengths, but I would love to hear the whole version. And recently they've been putting out those deluxe editions where they would have the studio outtakes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
The deluxe edition of the first album was very disappointing. There was hardly anything on it that, wasn't already there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anybody knows where is this longer version of The Warning. Another thing about the first album was that it was recorded live. They didn't put down different tracks. They all did it together and
Interesting.
in one take. So it's basically a live album.
Huh.
In a studio, which is crazy. Like they don't do that.
Was that for monetary purposes? Like for
they didn't have
money
time. Yeah, they didn't have money. They had to do it real quick and get in and get out. They didn't have time for like
Fast
doing
and
another
dirty.
take. Yeah, it's crazy that's what you hear on there. Then we have Paranoid, 1970. Yes, 1970. That's back when bands used to come out with 2 albums a year.
It's crazy.
It is.
I mean, I guess if you're recording them live all in one take, then it's easier to do something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah. So this is definitely my favorite Ozzy era album. There's not a bad song on it.
Not at all. Like from top to bottom, it's flawless. The cover of the album, it was supposed to be a war pig because the song War Pigs. So it's a pig with a sword, but they decided the record company or whatever decided to change it to Paranoid at the last minute. So they changed the title but not the artwork So we have a guy with a sword or something who is supposed to be paranoid now. Like, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
You could look at it like through the eyes of someone who is paranoid. Like
Yeah.
this is the vision of what I'm seeing when I am paranoid.
You know what? That makes perfect sense. I go with that.
There you go.
Because
See?
he's like trailing off. It's
Solved
almost
it.
like you're tripping when you're looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you know what, anybody who's listening, bring up the pictures of these albums while you're, listening to us, because you
We'll
could
make
use the
comments
visual.
on them, yeah.
Yeah, you could use the visual aid. I love the covers
Because if you have nothing
because
else to
they're
do with your
so.
lives and to listen to us talk for 100 hours and bring up friggin' Google images and shit.
They could be analyzed, a lot, because they're just so off the wall, the artwork.
Anyway.
So the song Paranoid was actually a last minute filler track because they had a little bit of extra time and they needed some, they had time for another song, so they were like, okay, we'll do a song, and they did it really quickly, and now it's one of their biggest hits.
Yeah. And that particular song always made me feel better about my own like mental, emotional issues. It just kind of spoke to me in that fashion.
It did for me too. It was the one of my favorite high school songs.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as tracks on this album, there's War Pigs, which we talked about a little bit. I always loved the line, politicians hide themselves away. They only started the war. Why should they go out and fight? They leave that all to the poor. Like, it's like kind of deep and political. And
Yeah, a lot of what Geezer wrote was very, political, very anti-war.
Yeah, it's a social commentary that kind of stuck with me, that I enjoy. I just talked about how paranoid makes me feel good about my own fucked up head sometimes. And Fairies Wear Boots is my absolute favorite Sabbath song. So
it's a great one. And Rat Salad is also one where Bill Ward shines. It's probably his biggest moment on a Sabbath studio record, because it has a big drum solo in it.
Yeah, and what a cool title for a song. I don't Rat Salad.
It's just, it's like, what does it mean? Like, it's just what it's called, which is, it's funny. Planet Caravan, that one, I've actually, speaking of that title, I've always felt that means like the planet itself is a caravan and we're just going around.
Okay,
and
yeah.
It's a very spacey song. It's Planet Caravan, I used to put it on repeat and just listen to it to go to sleep at night, because when I was in high school, I would do that, and it's a very relaxing song. So overall, I mean, Paranoid, it has a lot of the bluesy influence from the first album, but it takes it a step further.
It's got Iron Man, which is like probably arguably one of the most played Sabbath songs.
Iron Man is one of the most famous riffs of all time. So then we move on to Master of Reality. This is where Iommi started down-tuning his guitars.
I love how to...
Yes, Sweet Leaf. That was actually Iommi coughing because Ozzy gave him a joint right before they recorded it.
Nice.
And they just left it in there. There was a lot of padding on this album where they wanted to do like a heavy song and then a little acoustic like fluff filler and then into another heavy song. So the way Tony described it, it's like light and shade. A calm before the storm to make the storm seem heavier. Yeah. Now I think this album could be experienced two ways. I think you could turn off all the filler tracks and then just listen to it as one heavy, constant, assault, or listen to it in its entirety and you get that light and shade feeling. To me, it's a little bit, it's disorienting, not in a bad way, but it's like, it just has this constant, unpredictable nature about it. When you listen to that album, it's just, it goes from soft to heavy so many times.
Well, that's the way they wanted it, so you should listen to it that way. It's Black fucking Sabbath.
Oh, okay.
Don't argue with them.
Speaking of the way you should listen to it, I always felt like After Forever should have definitely been the opening track. Just listen to the beginning of After Forever.
Well,
like that's the way an album should start. But You take it for what it is.
Sweet Leaf is like another one of my favorite songs ever from Sabbath, so.
Children of the Grave's probably the first true metal song.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that for sure. It's one of the first, like, fast riffs that you've got going on.
It is. I mean, Paranoid was fast, but Children of the Grave is just like, it just...
Hard and fast.
Yeah, that song is a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Into the Void, that might be my favorite one on the album. It's hard to pick. But Into the Void just has that real doomy guitar sound. Like if I were to point people to one particular song to say what does Tony Iommi's guitar sound sound like, I would say Into the Void is a great example.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I think together Paranoid and Master Reality are two of the best albums ever.
Definitely in Sabbath, Ozzy era.
Definitely. There was a deluxe edition of Master Reality also, and has almost like an alternate version of almost every song on it. Just lots of outtakes. Very, very interesting to hear. Not to mention Paranoid, like hearing Ozzy sing Paranoid with different lyrics and stuff. It's just really weird. Then we have Volume 4 from 1972. This is where they started to get really crazy.
Heavily into drugs by this point.
Yeah. They rented a mansion where they had coke coming in unmarked vans. They did a lot of coke on this album. That's where the inspiration for the song Snowblind came. Originally, the album title was going to be Snowblind, but they changed it to Volume 4 because the record company didn't want any controversy.
Yeah. That just blows my mind. I talk about it with all the bands that are like known for drugs, but it blows my mind how they can create music and do live shows and just exist having done so much drugs and then still create, great music. I don't know how, like I always say, like I have too much to drink and I can't tie my shoes, let alone make a freaking epic album that will live past me.
But this is one of the first ones where I would legitimately say, like, okay, this album came from drugs.
Yeah, I mean, you can
like,
definitely see it in the production for sure, like and even the content of the music and everything. Yeah, it's clear that they're doing a ton of coke at this point.
And I would never ever endorse drugs, but like this was one good result that came of drugs, having Volume 4. But there's things on it where it's just like weird choices. Like there's a song on it called FX, and what happened there was that they were all naked in the studio and they were all dancing around in a circle, hitting Iommi's guitar with their cross necklaces. I just imagine that image of them dancing around in a circle naked, hitting a guitar, and then not only to be fucked up to do that in the first place, but then to make the decision to put it on the album.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
make the recording.
It's not a song. It's just like a sound effect.
Yeah, it's clear that there was not a downtime like that. They, like, because that's something you think, you're like, okay, yeah, you're high. Then when you're clear-headed, you look back and you're like, no, that's not going on the album. There was no clear-headed moment. It was just like, no, it's fucking on the album, man. It's staying.
And then there's songs like Changes, which was done on a piano, and it's non-typical of anything else you'd hear, Yeah,
it's a drastic departure from like what they've been doing.
Yeah, and then Supernaut is this really mind-tripping song with lyrics like, I'm going to climb up every mountain on the moon and find the dish that ran away with the spoon. And I don't know what it is, Supernaut just has this really fun riff. It just sounds like you put it on and it just makes you feel like just jumping around. It's just like a fun kind of...
Well, I always thought the song, not to cut you off, with how songs like make you feel a certain way. Like I think Laguna Sunrise like sounds like California. Like it sounds like California. I don't know.
Yeah. And then there's a song Under the Sun, Every Day Comes and Goes, which is a real heavy one. You listen to that, and that's kind of more one of the ones that comes to your mind when you think of Sabbath. Yeah, and speaking of how crazy they were at this time, This is probably a good little moment just to get off on a little tangent from his book, I Am Ozzy, because the stories in this book are just so crazy.
Nah.
Like everybody knows that he's led a pretty crazy life, but when you read some of these stories, it's just like holy shit. So Ozzy bought a home out in the countryside where he had all this extra space to fill. So anything he wanted from his manager, he just says, here, give me this.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a gypsy caravan with a little fireplace inside, a 7-foot tall stuffed grizzly bear, and a Mina bird named Fred who lived in the laundry room. His exact words in the book were, he could do a wicked impression of a washing machine, could Fred, or at least until I put a shotgun to his face and told him to shut the fuck up. Ozzy got into guns a lot. He took the stuffed grizzly bear and he blew its fucking head
so
off.
it's like getting into coke wasn't bad enough. Like, put coke and guns and how he's still alive.
He was a maniac. He strapped these mannequins to a tree trunk, and as he says in the book, he executed them at dawn. And one time, there's a bunch of stray cats that got into his garage and scratched up his new Mercedes. So he started shooting at all the cats.
Aww.
I know, like so. Yeah, it's pretty.
Drugs are bad, kids.
Drugs are bad. He shot a bunch of chickens one time after his first wife Thelma asked him to feed them, and this is the most amazing section in the book. It starts on page 172 and goes to about 177. So if you're gonna read anything from his book, I would totally recommend this part.
No, just read the whole fucking thing.
Read the whole thing, but let me just tell you about what happens here with these chickens, because it's so cinematic. Like if I were making the movie, this would have to go into the movie. There's this steady build-up, all these thoughts that are going through Ozzy's head, and quotes from all different things that people were saying that bothered him. His wife telling him to feed the chickens, business people telling him about tax bills, and Tony talking about the direction of the band, and it's all just like weighing down on him. And the way it's written out, like I can just see it visually, that you have this like steady zoom going into Ozzy's face, and all the dialogue is happening with like voiceovers, and he's just getting pissed off to the point where he shoots the chickens. And he says that he was like covered in blood and feathers, and he threw a gas container all over him, and just he threw a cigarette at it, and then just it exploded.
It's like some machete fucking shit there.
It's like an action movie. Like I just see Ozzy just standing in front of this.
Played by Bruce Willis.
Just imagine Ozzy covered in blood and plumage, just flicking a cigarette and turning around in slow motion as it explodes behind him. And there's one chicken left after the explosion. So what does he do? He takes a samurai sword and he ends up chasing the chicken all through the fields. And he says the only thing going through his head was kill the chickens, kill the chickens. Then there's the chapter called Killing the Vicar, where a local priest comes to visit him and his wife. And Ozzy wasn't home, but he had this piece of cake that he made, which I guess his wife didn't know about. And this cake was made from some kind of Afghan hash that's really potent. And the consistency was so strong because there wasn't much cake mix when Ozzy made it, so it was like 80% dope. So the priest passes out, and then Ozzy legitimately like thought he was dead, and then ended up dropping off the priest at his house and leaving him on his front doorsteps. And then he waited days in paranoia for the cops to show up, and nothing happened. And then finally he saw the priest one day, and he was fine, and everything was okay. And the priest couldn't remember anything that happened. And Ozzy felt really bad. So he said to the priest, like, let me know if you need anything for the church, any kind of help. And the priest says, well, can you play the organ? Like, aren't you in some kind of pop group or something? He's like, yes, I am. What do you call yourselves? Black Sabbath. And that's how the chapter ends right there.
Nice.
Anyway, that was volume 4. Very crazy period in the band's history.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get into Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, 1973. This one was written at Clearwell Castle. It was a place that had a moat, giant fireplaces everywhere, animal heads on the wall, swords and armor, and a musty old dungeon where they rehearsed in. And supposedly this place was haunted, so they played all kinds of practical jokes on each other. They would throw dummies out windows. They tied strings to furnitures in bedrooms to make things move. They did a trick with a mirror one time with Bill, and just all around scared the crap out of each other. So the title track, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which by the way, that's the English way to say it. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. The American way is Sabbath fucking Sabbath.
Oh, because they talk different than us.
Well, it's fucking, just the context.
Yeah, I get it.
Instead of a bloody Sabbath, it's a fucking Sabbath.
Ha.
Now, you would call Sabbath Bloody Sabbath one of the greatest hits, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it's one of my favorites.
I mean, I first heard it on a Greatest Hits album, but the thing is, they don't play it live anymore. It's never on any of their, their set lists. And, I mean, they do the intro, but they do the intro right before Paranoid. I think the reason is because it's one where Ozzy has to sing it really, really high, and I guess he just doesn't feel comfortable singing it anymore.
Yeah, he just doesn't feel capable of hitting those notes anymore.
Yeah, and speaking of which, this whole album is pretty much ignored on all their concerts, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely one of my favorites. National Acrobat, great song. Killing Yourself to Live. Sabracadabra, at the end, Ozzy's goofing around saying stick it up her ass and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, I like that. That song gets me because it's got a little bit of a honky-tonk kind of thing going on, which kind of appeals to me sometimes. And I just appreciate it. It's like this very uncomplicated message. It's like, I want to get laid is basically what it means. It's like
Sabracadabra.
Yeah. It's just that's the whole point of the song. It's not like super philosophical or anything.
It's just a weird song. At the end when he's saying all that stuff, you can't hear it because they put phasing on it, so you can't tell what's going on. So it's like subliminal messages. So he was just singing whatever.
And back to the title track of Sabby. that was a mistake on that metal show one time, Sabby.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I was trying to think of where I heard that.
I legitimately just made that slip, but
it's like, put Sabby Bloody Sabbath up there.
Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the song. I think it's pretty cool. Like, I don't know if they did it on purpose, but it kind of tells their experience a little bit of being, getting the success and not really knowing how to deal with it, and people fucking them over and stuff. So it's like they fill your head all full of lies.
Yeah.
It's like kind of tells their experience of being screwed over by record executives and stuff like that. So it's kind of, I always liked that about it.
Yeah, definitely. Like those were lyrics that really got in my head in high school. Spiral Architect has a full orchestra. Tony Iommi wanted to play bagpipes on this track, but he couldn't figure out how to play them. So he ended up putting a vacuum on the bagpipes so he could just use his fingers. But it didn't end up on the album.
Clever bastard.
And before we move on to the next one, the cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath might be the best album artwork in their whole history, and it might even be the best cover in metal, period. Because I mean, look at it.
It's some dark shit.
You got 666, and it's like this guy is like going to hell, and the thing is, if you turn it around, if you look on like the other side of it, it's basically like there's two artworks, and they're both done by Drew Struzan, who did like all kinds of movie posters and stuff. There's both a guy on a deathbed, and on one side he's going to hell, on the other side he's going to heaven. And if you look at the heaven one, there's a weird kind of how do I say, like subliminal thing going on, where I read about this in the Black Sabbath FAQ book by Martin Popoff, and I just couldn't stop laughing when I heard this, because I've seen this so many times and never thought of it this way. You see what I mean, right?
Yeah, there's, like, so if you're looking at the bedspread on the guy, and if you follow it from corner to corner, it's kind of like his arms spread out. And then if you follow it down between the two lions, there's like the rest of his back and, at the start of like some pants or some jeans or something. So
Like you're looking at the back of a guy.
yeah, so from the back of a person, and the shadowy area at the foot of the person in bed would be like the head under
the head
the
is.
covers. So he's totally going down on this dude.
It is completely a guy going down on somebody. That is exactly what is happening on this.
It's whoever the effed up individual was that figured that out. I don't know, because that's not exactly what I see when I first look at it.
Yeah, like you'd never notice until someone points it out. I do not think it was intentional.
It's also the perspective is totally wrong. It'd be like a giant going down on the guy, but
yeah, like it's not what it is. But now I can't think of it any other way.
Yeah, you totally ruined that for me for the rest of my life.
It takes some imagination, but yeah. So that's the back cover of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Now we move on to Sabotage. And while we're on the topic of covers, we might as well talk about this one. It's just the band standing in front of a mirror, but the choice of what they wore is just strange. Like Bill Ward, for some reason, didn't like the jeans he was wearing or something, so he put on some tights that his girlfriend had or something, and he didn't have any underwear that he was wearing, so he had to borrow Ozzy's underwear. And he says to this day he still thinks he has Ozzy's underwear laying around somewhere. So by the mid-'70s, the band members were drifting apart from each other. They weren't hanging out together as often. The manager was screwing them over. They fired him, and then there were lots of lawsuits. So they spent more time with lawyers than they spent time actually writing music. So the album took a lot longer than the other ones. So they kind of called it Sabotage because it was like their record was being sabotaged by the lawyers and all the businessmen and everything. And it was a distracting environment to work in. So they wrote songs about it. Like The Writ. The Writ is one that Ozzy wrote. Mostly Geezer wrote things, but The Writ was all about Ozzy just venting.
Yeah, I mean, this album kind of, and the songs in it paint a clear picture of, this drug-induced paranoia that maybe was legitimate with everything that they were going through with their lawyers and everything, and just this decay of the band, decay of their mental states, decay of their personal relationships and everything.
Yeah, and it has some great songs on it. Hole in the Sky.
It's one of my favorites, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could put that riff on endless loop, and I could just listen to it all day. I cannot get enough of that riff from Hole in the Sky. Symptom of the Universe is unmistakably metal. That is a heavy, heavy track. Superstars is a track that they use to open the shows most of the time. This was a 40-member choir and an 86-year-old harpist. And Ozzy said he walks in and says, they were making a noise like God conducting the soundtrack to the end of the world. And he didn't even know what to do. He's like, I'm not going to sing on this. Like, how am I going to, what am I going to, add to this? So I
can't possibly open my mouth and add to this.
Yeah. So it's an instrumental track. Okay, so Technical Ecstasy, 1976. This is what most people consider the beginning of the end, when they were falling apart as a band.
Yeah.
I think Dirty Women is the best song on the album.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's like, if an STD could be a song, it would be Dirty Women. Anyway.
And It's All Right is a really good one with Bill Ward singing. It's unusual. And actually, Guns N' Roses has been covering It's All Right lately. Interesting that they chose a track that, Bill Ward sang on. Technical Ecstasy is not a bad album. It's definitely not as good as anything that came before it. So they were on a downward slope. But if you're a hardcore fan, it's definitely worth checking out. Now the cover of Technical Ecstasy is supposed to be two robots screwing on an escalator.
I see it.
I don't get it. I've always thought that they're fighting, like they're shooting lasers at each other, but
Well, you don't know how robots fuck.
I don't, no. So I guess that's how. Never Say Die. By the way, I don't have much to say about that cover. Do you?
Nope.
Okay. It's just what it is. That's the way I've always felt about that one. Never Say Die, 1978. It generally has a pretty bad reception. The band members usually slag it. This is the one that nobody really likes, but it's not that bad.
No.
The title track is straight to the point. It's just,
Comes at you kicking ass.
comes right at you. Never Say Die. Johnny Blade is like a comic book coming alive. That song is probably my favorite on the whole album. Junior's Eyes, again, that's a great song. I mean, it's a very personal one. I can't help but think that it's about Ozzy's father dying, because his father died around that time. And speaking of which, that's...
Did Ozzy write it?
You know what? I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, but I know that they had another guy sing on it at one point, Dave Walker, because Ozzy left the band because he was in such a bad place at the time. So they brought in this other guy, Dave Walker, and they only recorded one thing, I think. They did like a TV appearance, and they did Junior's Eyes. Then Ozzy came back. As far as the rest of the songs go, Breakout's an instrumental. Swingin' the Chain has Bill Ward on vocals. So there's a lot of parts where they're just trying to fill in that Ozzy's not there. So they were just doing whatever they could. So it's really like a hodgepodge of an album. Like there's nothing consistent about it.
Yeah.
And another thing that was happening was that gets a lot of talk is Van Halen was opening for Black Sabbath at this time.
Okay.
And the common story is that Van Halen like blew them away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know that was during this tour, but I've heard that story about how kind of like Van Halen was the opening act, but they were kind of out showing Sabbath at the time.
Yeah, like it just seemed like Sabbath had run its course by this point, and that they were kind of just reaching the end,
Yeah.
So the second time when Ozzy left, he was actually kicked out this time because he just wasn't cutting it. They were trying to get work done, and he didn't have a lot of motivation. One time he took a whole bottle of sleep medication, and he passed out in somebody's hotel room that wasn't his own, so they couldn't find him, and they had to go on to do a show, and Ozzy was missing, so they had to cancel the show. And then later on, he showed up and had no concept of anything that had happened, and they were all worried about him and trying to find him.
Yeah.
So eventually they kicked him out because they needed to move on. They needed to keep the band together. And this is when they began Heaven and Hell, 1980, one of their best albums they ever did.
So we've got a new singer now, Mr. Ronnie James Dio.
Dio made them a better band. Rather than singing along with the riff like Ozzy, he sang across the riff. I mean, he'll never be as charismatic as Ozzy, but as a singer, he definitely took them a step further. They were able to use different chords, and like they could say something like, "Hey, can you sing with this?" Rather than just sticking to what they knew Ozzy could handle. Like there were just less limitations. So it gave them freedom to explore with the music more and to challenge themselves. And Dio was involved in the musical side as well. Like he would offer suggestions, and he also wrote the lyrics. So Geezer didn't have to write anymore. Now he could concentrate on playing bass.
Yeah, it's a totally different animal. I mean, they're two different styles of frontmen, but they're just both so iconic. As far as Sabbath goes.
Like no one will ever be as iconic as Ozzy, but Dio was what the band needed at that time.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're not going to get into Ozzy's solo career, but just quickly, like his solo career kicked ass. I mean, he always surrounded himself with amazing guitar players, Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde, and others.
Yeah, he definitely picked himself up by the bootstraps and went on to have a a kick-ass career. You know, when nobody expected it of him, he was in a really bad place emotionally and drug-wise and everything else. And
Sharon picked him up out of the
exactly.
hole
Everybody hates on Sharon, but Sharon totally saved his life and his career at that point. And, you know, he went on to have a great career.
And the thing is, Sabbath and Ozzy become synonymous at sometimes. Like on the radio, you'll never hear an Ozzy. You'll never hear a Sabbath song that isn't Ozzy.
An excellent story about that was how when I first met you, I went to a record store and I wanted to buy you like an LP, like an album to add to your collection, and I picked up Mob Rules, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is great. And the guy in the store was like, oh, you don't want that. That's Dio's Sabbath. He's gonna want an Ozzy album. So I put it down and I didn't buy it for you, even though like in the back of my head I just met you, so I didn't know you that well yet, and I was just like, in the back of my head I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is his favorite album, but this guy seems to think he's not gonna like it, so I'm gonna put it back. So yeah, like even this record store owner couldn't see that this was a perfectly fine choice to buy you.
Yeah, or it just gets me when the radio will play a block of Ozzy, but they'll play War Pigs, Paranoid, and then Crazy Train. It's just, you know, it's two different things, but the voice is what people hear. When people hear Ozzy's voice, his voice is so unmistakable that that's kind of what sells the brand. So Sabbath, without Ozzy, it just got the shitty end of the stick. Like people don't even know that Ozzy wasn't the leader of Black Sabbath. That you know, Tony Iommi is Black Sabbath, and no matter how good Sabbath was, they're always overshadowed by Ozzy. And Ozzy, on the other hand, took it personal that Sabbath continued without him. Like he didn't listen to it for the same reason he didn't keep a picture of his ex-wife. That's one thing he said. Although I don't think that's entirely true, because in his book he said that the first albums they did with Dio were pretty good. So he has acknowledged it, but it's always been two separate things. Like he's never considered that Black Sabbath. And there was an article in Circus Magazine, 1984, where Ozzy said that Born Again was their best album since then. But who knows? Like I find some inconsistent things sometimes.
Okay.
But generally, it's just like Ozzy was really bothered by the fact that they were.
I completely see both sides of the story, is what I'll say. Like you can totally understand why they'd kick him out at that point, but you know that had been his life for so long that of course he's going to look back at it and be bitter that he's not part of it anymore. All right, so now we have Ronnie James Dio. You know, he added a whole new element to the band and is his own thing. We just talked at length about how Ozzy was largely, his voice was considered a staple for Sabbath, but you know, Dio is not meant to be overlooked. He was a powerhouse, you know, for such a tiny little dude. He can sing like a motherfucker. Personally, I have always said that I was scared of Ronnie James Dio. Now I got to explain myself here. There's three things in this world that I would always say I'm scared of. There's small spaces, I'm claustrophobic, venomous snakes, and Ronnie James Dio.
You have a phobia of Dio.
Not so much now that he's passed. I will say that his struggle with cancer and his passing has kind of humanized him a bit for me. But when he was in his prime, I was scared of him in the same way that I'm scared of like Ouija boards.
You mean from seeing him in his prime? Like, I mean, from seeing footage of him when he was in his prime?
Yeah, or even when we saw him.
I think he was always. You know, like, I need to clarify. He was always in his prime.
Well, of course.
Like he never, you know, put on a bad show.
He went to the grave still rocking, for sure.
He did.
But, I mean, like, in his younger years, I suppose I should say. I don't know. He's just kind of like this wizard or elf or something. Or he just had this mystical power about him.
Well, he's everything he's done has always been about like magic and stuff. Like he was in a band called Elf. Well, they were called the Electric Elves, and then I think the Elves, and then Elf. Like it changed names a lot of times before it became Elf.
Yeah.
And then he was in Rainbow. which was the band that Ritchie Blackmore started after he disbanded Deep Purple. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's a lot of connections between Deep Purple and Sabbath. There's like a big family tree, but I'm not going to get into that right now.
Yeah, that would be a whole other podcast. But I don't know. Dio just is always giving me the willies a little bit for some reason. He just seems like he has some mystical powers or something. I don't know. And being the one time that I was like sort of in his presence at the Heaven and Hell tour, or when they were called, sorry.
We'll get into that. When they toured under the name Heaven and Hell, which was when we saw them live.
Yeah,
we're going to get into concerts later.
He just had this scary little aura about him. Kind of like, like I said, it makes me feel the same way as I feel like around the Ouija board or something like that. I don't know. Moving on from my personal strange fear of Ronnie James Dio. He's an amazing dude. One of my absolute favorite frontmen, metal presences, people. I was genuinely sad when he passed. And
yeah, but we're going to get into that later. I feel we didn't really talk about any of the songs on Heaven and Hell, but just from top to bottom,
the title track, Heaven and Hell.
That's an epic song. Go ahead.
Let me just say, if James Rolfe has an anthem, this song is it. It follows him everywhere.
It used to be the Cinemassacre theme song. Like I used to use it on the logo back in the old days.
Yeah, just to feel like from the day I've met you until now, it's like that is your anthem. You play it a lot. It follows you around. It's like it is your song, man.
And Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Die Young. Is there a bad song on this album? No.
Yeah.
So we'll move on. But actually, I should mention Jeff Nichols was the keyboardist on this album, and he was a guy who would be the keyboardist and like offstage rhythm guitarist sometimes. So he was kind of like the man behind the scenes at Black Sabbath. There's the cover with the Angels smoking pot.
Yeah, this is a great cover.
And then Bill Ward at this time was going through a lot of hell. He missed Ozzy. He couldn't take it. He felt like going on with the band at this point was just like, he just felt it wasn't right, like it wasn't Black Sabbath without Ozzy.
Okay.
And he got into alcoholism a lot, and eventually Bill left. So then we replace him with Vinny Appice on drums, and they record The Mob Rules, 1981. Now, this one I think it's just as good as Heaven and Hell, if not better.
Yeah, it's my favorite Dio era album.
The title track, Mob Rules, it gets you so pumped up. I could put that on any time. It's just a really good rocking track. Voodoo, awesome riff on Voodoo.
Sign of the Southern Cross.
Very epic song and apocalyptic almost. Mm-hmm. Falling Off the Edge of the World. They're all just great epic songs. The cover is really wild. There's like some kind of there's like almost like a devil face if you look in the blood splotch in the middle. But it's very subtle. There's also this subliminal message which is not true. It's just something that people have found where it says Ozzy at the bottom, but some people have gone further to say that it says kill Ozzy or something, because it does look like there's some words down there and you can almost see Ozzy, but it's just, if you look hard enough.
The Ozzy part you can kind of see, but I don't get the kill part.
If you look at it on the vinyl record, it's easier to see. Mm-hmm. It's there if you really look hard, but it's just like,
finding Jesus' face in a piece of toast.
I guess. It's just something you could find it if you look hard enough. Then we move on to Live Evil, 1982. This was the first live album that Black Sabbath had ever done officially. There was one called Live at Last, which was like a bootleg of the Ozzy lineup. Live Evil, the only problem I have with it is that there's not enough crowd noise. Like, I really hate the way it's mixed. And like you need to hear the crowd on a live
chaps
album.
your ass when it's
It does, and I think it's especially embarrassing on the song "Heaven and Hell" because you hear Dio's firing up the crowd, and he's like, "You're gonna all be on a live record. Let me hear you." And he's like, "When I say heaven and hell, he's like trying to get them to sing along with it, and he's like, "Oh, you're fantastic. You sound so great," and you can't hear him.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Your personal vendetta against live albums that don't include the crowd.
you can't. I mean, it
I
is
agree.
there.
You're
You
right.
can hear it, but it's very low in the mix. And like when he says like you're gonna be on a Sabbath record, like it's like yay, like you don't hear anything. Like it sounds like nobody cared, like they're not excited.
Yeah.
But they're there. The crowd exists. You just can't. It doesn't
It's
sound
just
like
the
you're
way
there.
it's mixed.
The actual performance though of Heaven and Hell is amazing. It's a really long extended version because they usually extend it when it's live. So there's a really really long guitar solo on it, and it's interesting to hear Dio singing the Ozzy songs.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting though is that Ozzy released "Speak of the Devil" live with all Sabbath tracks. So it was almost like a competition, and he rushed out "Speak of the Devil" before Black Sabbath's Live Evil.
So it was all kind of like businessy moves at this point.
It seemed like it, and Don Arden went back to managing Black Sabbath, and his daughter was Sharon.
Yeah. Okay.
Who would become Sharon Osbourne. So there's these constant chess moves going back and forth.
So you got Sharon managing Ozzy, who has, if
A
I
feud with
remember
her
correctly,
father.
a feud with her dad, who's
And
managing
A
Sabbath.
feud as in like in Ozzy's book says that one time she tried to run over her dad with her car. If that's
see
not
her doing that.
intense, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
There is a lot of fighting in the band at this point. Dio said that he and Vinny Appice showed up one time at the studio mixing, and the other guys were late. And he said that this went on for days and days. And then Iommi's side of the story is that he said that they would come in and they would find that the mixes would be all different, and that the one of the technicians who was drinking a lot and who was like who's just basically really drunk, and you don't know if maybe what he said was
Can't take
true
his
or not.
word for truth.
Yeah, like he said, he told Tony that Dio and Appice were sneaking in late at night and like
Remixing
changing
the
the mix.
tracks.
Yeah, so there's two sides of the story, and like basically they just had a lot of differences during the post production of this live album. And Dio left, and he took Appice with him and formed the Dio Band. Then we come to Born Again, 1983. This album featured Ian Gillan on vocals from Deep Purple, which sounds like it was like a conscious decision, like let's get the singer from Deep Purple. But keep in mind, Deep Purple wasn't around at this time. They were broken apart.
Okay.
And basically Ian Gillan and Tony Iommi just met up at a bar one time and got really wasted, and were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool, let's start like a super group band together. So it's not something they put a lot of thought into. They just went ahead and did it. And supposedly it already hit the press like after that night at the bar, like already it was like getting wind, and like the managers and nobody had any involvement were like, what the hell, like when did you guys make this decision?
Yeah.
So it was a
Some
very
dickhead in the booth next to him probably heard it and sold it to the press or something.
who knows? Yeah. Like it's just something that just happened. It was a very hasty thing. Like lots of people think that the singer from Deep Purple in Black Sabbath is an awkward fit. Like it just doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But if I didn't know...
Both colors, come on.
Yeah, they're both colors. But I wouldn't have thought anything of it if I didn't know who Ian Gillan was. If you just listen to what ended up on the record, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, his vocals go so high, it's like inhuman. And I think that totally fits this like sort of metal sound that they had with this one. Because Born Again is a heavy album. Bill Ward came back on drums, so his drinking was more under control now.
Okay.
Until they went on tour, that's when it started to get the best of him again, and now he was drinking again. So they replaced him by Bev Bevan from Electric Light Orchestra for the tour.
Okay.
Um,
But he's on the album, Bill.
Bill is on the album. It's the last one that Bill ever did on an album.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, he did his own solo records afterwards.
And
but
he toured with them live.
he did tour with them like during the Ozfest and everything. But this was the last one with Bill Ward on a Sabbath record, and it still is.
Yeah.
30 years later, almost. He could have been on one, but things didn't work out.
We will cross that bridge in a moment.
We'll get there. The song "Trashed" is based on an incident with Ian Gillan. It was actually a near-death experience. They were recording at this place called the Manor, and Gillan took somebody's car out onto the back where there was a go-kart track, because there just happened to be this go-kart track in the back. And guess whose car it was, by the way? It was Bill Ward's, of course.
Yeah.
So he takes Bill's car and he goes down this go-kart track and he ends up flipping the car over and almost goes into a pool. And had he gone into the pool, he would have probably drowned.
Yeah.
Because he was unconscious at the time and just drunk out of his mind. So that's where the song "Trashed" came from.
It's my favorite on the album for sure. I love this song.
Yeah, I love "Trashed." Another thing that happened was they would lay pyro all over the property because they'd have all this like pyro from touring, you know?
Yeah.
So they'd put it all around, and Ian Gillan liked to sleep outside in a tent, and they blew his tent up one time. And they also, there's a story about where they sank somebody's boat too.
Oh, jeez.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was Bill's also.
Yeah, poor Bill.
So, Gillan tried to put a fish under Tony's bed one time. I think this was actually...
Sleep with the fishes.
What?
You sleep with the fishes.
Okay. What's that from?
It's like a mob thing. Like if you put a fish in somebody's bed, it means you're gonna kill them.
Really?
You're gonna get them killed or something.
Ah.
I think.
Wow. So he's trying to put this fish in Tony's bed. Actually, I think this is right after the the incident where he crashed the car. It's like the same day. So he must have rolled out of that car and then just went to get this fish.
I almost died.
And
I think I'll put a fish in Tony's bed.
Yeah. So he had to climb up the outside of the house to get through his bedroom window just so he could put this fish under his bed. And coming into the window, he caught his foot on the radiator and he fell into the room and twisted his ankle. So, I mean, these guys were just getting all fucked up. The song "Disturbing the Priest," Iommi was experimenting with his guitar sounds. So he put speakers all around the property, in the outhouse or wherever. So they were just blasting this music all hours of the night. And a local priest came by and asked them to turn it down. And in the morning, then the church bells would wake them up.
Oh.
So it was kind of like this back and forth thing going on. So that's where the song "Disturbing the Priest" came. Now, about that sound that Tony was trying to get, the album "Born Again" has this really shitty garage sound. Gillan blames it on Geezer. He says it was completely Geezer's fault. He says he was trying to turn up his bass and all kinds of things.
Okay.
Which, you know what, his bass was really lacking on the Live Evil album, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was trying to rectify that on this one.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, the recording quality of this album just became a total mess. It sounds like crap, but that's something I kind of like about it. Like, it's not really trying to pull off any crazy tricks. It's just, it's just a straight-on heavy rock album.
Fair enough.
And the album cover.
Oh, that's a screwed up little baby.
It's like
Glad I didn't give birth to that.
Yeah. It's like a red baby with claws, and the background is like a blue. On the CD, it's purple. You know, we're looking at a CD right now, but on the vinyl record, it's like a really contrasty blue and red.
It's a stump the trunk.
It's a what?
That's a stump the trunk question.
Oh, like what version of the album had blue and purple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the colors were just so intense, and it's really like the worst album cover, but it's just so
I think
funny.
it's pretty cool.
I think it's cool too, but this is one where people look at it and are like, what the hell were they thinking with this one? And actually, I've heard a story where
This is the album that they look at and think, what the hell were they thinking? There's one where Bill Ward's wearing women's tights.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because they had such good ones leading up to this, like Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules had such
Yeah.
good... I love it too. I love the baby, but like the colors are just so intense. But there's a story also about how the artist who worked on it was working for Ozzy on the Ozzy side of things, and was doing this as like intentionally bad to try and get fired from Sabbath.
Yeah, I vaguely heard this story of how,
Yeah, and there's also a story about how Ian Gillan saw the finished artwork and he was so pissed off that he took a whole box full of albums and threw it out the window. Ian's quote in Kerrang! Magazine was, "I saw the album cover, then puked. Then I heard the record, then puked." He said it didn't matter if the record was good or not. It all boiled down to that baby. Everywhere he went, he said he couldn't get away from that baby. It was on the promotions and everywhere. And the beginning of the concert, they had these little people in baby costumes with devil horns, and they'd come out on stage like that. And then they also had a Stonehenge set, and it was Geezer's idea, but they got the measurements wrong. So they ended up with something that was too big to use in most venues. It was a lot, a life-sized Stonehenge. Like, it was as big as the real thing. Spinal Tap did the opposite. They had the joke where it was too small.
That's where that joke came from.
That's where it came from. Not too many people know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I was not aware of that. They used to play Smoke on the Water live, which was cool. So that was like the last song. And it's very rare to get any live recordings of this era. There were many disaster stories on this tour. Ian Gillan kept forgetting the lyrics. So he said he didn't know why, but for some reason the songs just weren't sticking. He even forgot the lyrics to Smoke on the Water, apparently.
Oh my God.
So every time he would forget it, he would just fill in the blanks with screams. So then he started doing cue sheets so that he could just turn the cue sheets with his feet so that he'd read the lyrics. Well, they had this low-lying fog that would come out on the stage, and it covered the lyrics so he couldn't see through the fog.
Oh, man.
And he used to trip a lot over the monitors and stuff when the fog was coming out.
I'm always genuinely worried about that when I do see fog like that's low-lying.
There's a lot of stuff that happens with that. One time, Rob Halford, when he comes out on the motorcycle, now we're talking about Judas Priest now all of a sudden, but one time there was so much fog he couldn't see where he was going with the motorcycle, and he ran right into the drum kit. Yeah. So
I mean, that's not funny, but it is.
I know. Fog can be dangerous sometimes. So Gillan had these Congo drums that he played on stage, and Jeff Nichols, who was usually behind the stage, said that nobody liked that he was doing the Congo drums because whenever he wasn't singing, he needed something to do, so he just wanted to like go over and start playing the Congo drums. Because he would play a tambourine and do all kinds of stuff like that. He just needed something to do, but with the other Black Sabbath guys, that just didn't jive with them. So they got these roadies to tie strings to the Congo drums, and they'd slowly pull them off stage, but just a little bit at a time, so that he'd have to keep going further away to play them. So by the end of the show, he was like having to go out to play the drums. So he got the message. And those devil babies in the beginning of the show, sometimes they'd start on the top of the Stonehenge thing, and they'd have to jump off. Okay. So at the beginning of the show, they would jump off the Stonehenge thing and they'd land on a fall mattress. And one time they didn't put the mattress in the right spot, and they also, there was these backlights that were on so they could still see where they were jumping. Well, they didn't have the backlights on, and nobody knew because the house lights were up.
Okay.
But then as soon as the house lights went down, everything went pitch black just when they were about to jump. So they ended up jumping, and, for some reason, because the mattress wasn't in the right spot, and they didn't know, and through all the combination of the lighting problem and everything that happened, they fell and pretty much just hit the stage.
Oh.
Yeah, that must have hurt. But, there's a lot of iconic songs on Born Again. Zero the Hero, a lot of people say, was the inspiration for Paradise City.
Okay.
It was probably a coincidence, but the riff definitely sounds like that. Hotline sounds a lot like Fight for Your Right, so it's possible they could have gotten it from... I mean, the Beastie Boys sampled a lot, so it's quite possible they could have done that. Born Again, I think it's an underrated album. But for whatever reason, it didn't jive with a lot of people. So Gillan left after that to reform Deep Purple, and it was a successful Deep Purple reunion. So that's pretty much where it's been now. It was just a temporary thing with Sabbath, but it was definitely an interesting chapter in the band's history. All right, so then there was a little bit of a flux period going on here. They had a guy named Dave Donato as the singer for about 10 seconds.
Okay.
As far as I know, they did one interview with the guy, and after that, he was pretty much, they canned him.
Okay.
I think he said something in the interview like he's the best singer that Sabbath ever had, or something kind of cocky.
And you're fired.
What? And you're fired. Probably at that point, it seemed like anything could get you fired from Sabbath, but...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not to say lots of people voluntarily left. It wasn't like everybody was fired, but, things don't work out for whatever reason. Then they did the Live Aid show in 1985 with Ozzy, and Bill Ward and everybody. So that was like a 3-song reunion.
Okay.
It was 3. I'm pretty sure it was 3 songs, and that was part of a big show. Actually, Led Zeppelin reunited for that momentarily with Phil Collins on drums,
Yep.
So that was basically like sort of the end chapter right there. Like that could have been like the end of Sabbath there. Like they did a reunion show with Ozzy. They could have left it at that maybe.
Yeah.
And Geezer left at that time too. So I guess he was kind of tired of all the lineup changes and everything that was going on. So Geezer's gone. Basically, you got nobody left now except Tony Iommi. Now, Iommi didn't want to make another Sabbath record. He wanted to make a solo record now, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So he puts out The Seventh Star, 1986, and it's supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album, but the record company forced him into calling it Black Sabbath because that would have sold more albums.
More green.
Yep. So what you see on the front of the album cover, it's Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. that's
featuring the founding member
that was
of the band.
Compromise. As far as singer goes, they had this guy named Jeff Fenholt that they tried out for a little while. He was from a Broadway show, Jesus Christ Superstar. But it didn't work out for whatever reason.
I was not aware of that.
No, I was not aware of that. We should have the sound bite from Mike Myers just play the whole time. So then they got, guess who? Another singer from Deep Purple, Glenn Hughes. Glenn Hughes was a guy who used to sing, he used to play bass and sing along with David Coverdale. So they had, David Coverdale singing at the same time. But that was back when, Deep Purple was still around before they broke up and formed Rainbow, Richie Blackmore and all that. So the album Seventh Star has a lot of great songs on it. It's the title track has an awesome riff. There's a little bit more production on this one. Like there's lots of keyboards and that kind of stuff that kind of bury Tony's guitar a little bit. And that's really my only complaint, that it's too big of a sound. Like they need to cut back a little bit, but there's really not that many complaints. It's a really great album, and it's very underrated. There's a wide range of songs on it. There's fast songs, there's slow songs, I mean, it's everything that makes a great rock album. Like if you would compare this to anything else that was out in the 80s, it holds its own. It's pretty damn good.
Cool.
I mean, it isn't dark enough to be Sabbath, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be a solo,
Exactly.
effort. Um, so then Glenn Hughes, unfortunately left the band. He wasn't in there too long. When he sang in Deep Purple, he was playing bass as well, like I, was mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
David Coverdale was kind of more the front man. So now he was fronting a band, Glenn Hughes. So, and the band was Black Sabbath. So that must have been a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
And especially when they all thought it was going to be a solo project. So now he has to go on stage and it's Sabbath, and he didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah. And now he has to be in podcasts how many years later as a frontman for Black Sabbath. That's not what he signed up for.
Exactly. And he's worked with Tony a lot after this, usually under just the name Iommi. They would put out solo albums. But so he's still on good terms with Tony, but at this moment in time, there was a bad incident that happened when he got kind of out of hand. He was, Glenn Hughes. Yeah, he was drinking a lot. Things were going on, and the production manager punched Glenn in the face, and his sinus got blocked up with blood that dried up, and it affected his singing. So he couldn't cut it on stage, and a swift decision had to be made. So Jeff Nichols was singing from backstage during the last show with Glenn Hughes lip syncing.
Oh, jeez.
And then they got a new singer, Ray Gillen, who is not related to Ian Gillan at all, and not even spelled the same way. And they slowly ushered this new guy in. So they kept him around as a backup without telling Glenn Hughes anything.
Okay.
And then when Glenn overheard it somehow, he flipped out. And they actually had to lock him out of a room with a dresser up against the door, which sounds like something you'd see in a cartoon.
Yeah.
And you can read about a lot of stuff in, there's a book, Black Sabbath, Never Say Die.
Okay.
And
I was just about to ask you, like, is this all just floating around in your head and you just happen to know this shit, or where the hell did it...
Well, both, but I read it,
Okay.
It's in that, and Tony Iommi has, his autobiography called Iron Man.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, a lot of these stories, though, are from interviews. They're collected from different things, so... There's always more than one side to a story. But,
well, for sure, yeah. Especially when you've got such a history and there's so many different people involved. Of course, there's going to be different sides to the story.
Yeah. But what we do know is that Glenn Hughes was out and Ray Gillen was in. Mm-hmm. So they got together to record The Eternal Idol in 1987. Do you think Ray Gillen stuck around long?
Well, I don't.
No. He was gone pretty quick. So, but he did record the first takes on the album. So, for a long time, there was this like mystical.
Where are we at now? We're at the Eternal Idol.
We're at the Eternal Idol. So, what happened with this one? They recorded the album with him, but by the time they released the album, he was gone. So they had to fill him in with a different singer, which we'll get to in a minute. But the deluxe edition of Eternal Idol, which they finally released recently, has the Ray Gillen sessions. So you could actually hear the album with two different singers, which is really interesting. And Ray was good. But then they got Tony Martin to fill in for him. And Tony Martin would become the most reliable and stable singer that Black Sabbath ever had, recording more albums with them than any other singer, second only to Ozzy. Now about the Eternal Idol, there's a lot of production on it again. I love the song The Shining. That's a really great song, but as a whole, Eternal Idol doesn't really get me the same way the other ones do. It's one of my lesser favorites. Like, I don't hate it or anything, but it's just not as good, I don't think.
Like, I'll just interject that it's getting a little James dominated at this point, and that's because I honestly don't know much about non-Ozzy or Dio Sabbath. For some reason, they just dominated my knowledge of Sabbath. So we will let Sabbath 101 with James Rolfe continue, and I will interject when I can.
Yeah, we never talked about how we got into the band, but one thing I'll say is that Tony Martin's usually the last era that most people would get to.
Yeah,
It was the
a
last
surprise
thing.
to me to learn that he actually had more albums than Dio and the most aside from Ozzy, because I honestly don't know much of his era.
Yeah, I mean, this stage in the band, like, I just want to admit, like, I love a lot of the songs on the Tony Martin albums, but it's sort of the last one that you get to because most of the time there's so much Black Sabbath that exists, so much to catch up on that, when I first got into them, I was listening to the Ozzy stuff, and then I went on to the Dio stuff.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got into the Tony Martin stuff, it was much, much later, and I just, like, I'm still listening. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still, like, you got to let the songs kind of grow on you a lot.
You gotta get out of your head too that it's called Black Sabbath and you've already got like an assignment in your brain for that band with these two other singers and then you've got a third and it's just like this whole mind fuck you've got to get over.
So we're moving on, and like I'm saying, I'm not shitting on it, but Eternal Idols, one of my least favorites, if not my ultimate least.
Okay. Nobody's making you choose.
Oh,
You don't have to choose.
oh, I don't have to choose.
You don't. No one can see me putting my hand on you, lovingly saying,
Oh.
"You don't have to choose."
So Headless Cross, 1989. This one's a little better, I think. By the cover, it looks a lot more like it's trying to get back to the old, Sabbath trademark of like,
Yeah.
it's got a gravestone on the cover, but it's kind of deceiving because again, it has that really big production with the keyboards and stuff, so it doesn't sound like, gritty old school Black Sabbath at all. But there's some really good songs on it. I like the title track. Even Kill in the Spirit World, like it just has a real catchy chorus, and Nightwing has a really, really awesome riff. The next one is Tear from 1990. As I've been told, it rhymes with beer.
Okay, because I had no clue how to say it.
I always used to think it was TYR. You just, but this one is underrated. I feel like this is the one that gets the least attention of the Tony Martin albums. But this is the one that I kind of like the way it sounds. Like I like the fact that this one is big because it sort of gets me into that mindset because it's all about like, I mean, you just look at the album cover and everything, and it just feels more like it's geared towards mythology. Mm-hmm. It's a very magical record. So I love the song The Lawmaker. That's the one that sticks out to me. This is like almost in the same vein as The Mob Rules, where it's really fast, and as soon as you turn it on, you're hooked. Next came Dehumanizer in 1992. This is first of a new kind of event in Sabbath's history, the reunion album. So this is a reunion of the Mob Rules lineup with Dio on vocals and Vinny Appice on drums and Geezer on bass. Mm-hmm. So they all came back for this one. You can kind of call that, Mark II Black Sabbath. I mean, when they did Heaven and Hell, Bill Ward was still on drums, but this lineup of the band is sort of like the Black Sabbath 2. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's a really heavy album. There's not any of that big production with the keyboards going on, and grunge music was taking shape at this time, so it seems like it may have been trying to follow that a little bit. But Dehumanizer is a great one. Computer God is one of my favorite Sabbath songs,
yeah, I actually
period.
know this one. I like this song quite a bit.
Cool, yeah. I mean, I play that one a lot because I feel
That's
like...
probably why.
Yeah. Computer God is one of those, like I would put it on like a hits compilation or something, or, best of. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's an important song in Sabbath's history. It gives me chills. I love the lyric, "Man's a mistake, we'll fix it." It's about technology taking over and becoming the new god, replacing humans with machines. It sounds like something that would, be written for the Terminator. And speaking of the Terminator, there is one little connection. The song "Time Machine" was used in Wayne's World during the scene where the Terminator is chasing after Wayne. You remember that? So
No.
you're shaking your head like that. You know when he comes and says,
because I kind of want to go put it in.
Yeah. Have you seen this boy? You know that part?
Yeah.
It's
With the cop.
Yeah, it's the Terminator, the bad Terminator from Terminator 2.
Yeah, uh-huh.
The song on that scene is Time Machine, and that was actually on the Wayne's World soundtrack. So there's two versions of the Time Machine song. One is the soundtrack version, and the other is the album version. Yeah, so, and I love the cover, too.
Yeah, the cover's pretty kick-ass.
It's a Grim Reaper, a metallic Terminator-looking Grim Reaper zapping a guy with electricity, and the dude is like turning into metal. It's just awesome. So I think this is maybe their best album since Mob Rules. Then came Cross Purposes, 1994. So okay, well Dio's gone again, and Vinny Appice with him. What happened here was sort of like, it almost seemed like Tony Martin never left. It was really just like a temporary reunion kind of thing. Because he had the Dio band going on, and Sabbath was actually asked to open for Ozzy for his farewell tour.
What?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And they did. But what happened was Dio didn't like the idea. Like, why are we opening for Ozzy? It was for 2 dates, actually. Like, they didn't do this for the whole tour. It was just like the last 2 dates on Ozzy's tour. And I think Dio's contract was up or something, so he wasn't really obligated to do those last 2 shows.
Yeah.
So he decided not to do them. And they replaced him with, guess who? Rob Halford. So
This is such a convoluted story, James Rolfe.
Rob Halford from Judas fucking Priest sang for them on 2 nights. That would actually happen again way later down the line.
Yeah.
A show I was at where Ozzy was sick. But anyway, this was Rob Halford singing the Dio songs, the Dio Sabbath songs, and
Rob Halford singing Dio Air Sabbath.
Yeah.
Opening up for Ozzy.
Rob Halford singing Computer God and all these vocally demanding songs.
Well, if anyone can handle it, it would be Rob Halford.
Yeah.
But this is just fucked up.
It's fucked up. It's crazy. And then
I'm riveted. It's like soap operas.
Yeah, and there is bootleg footage of the I think the second night. One of the 2 nights, there's footage of Halford singing. It's not great footage. It's like bootleg, somebody's video camera from like the nosebleeds or whatever. But it's it's pretty interesting. Okay, but then what happened was on the second night, at the end of Ozzy's set, the rest of Black Sabbath joined him on stage and played another reunion show.
Okay.
Pretty awesome. And that was another short one. I think they did a short set.
So Tony, Geezer, and Bill joined Ozzy.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And it was kind of like a final farewell. It was supposed to be like the last Ozzy tour and everything. And but time moves on and things happen. So anyway, then we get to their next album, which was Cross Purposes, and now we're in 1994. Tony Martin comes back, and like I said, it was like he never left almost. And this time, Geezer stuck around for this one.
Okay.
This would actually be Geezer's last album Geezer's last album until 13.
Okay.
And this, I think, is the best Tony Martin album.
Geezer's last album, period? Like he didn't do any solo stuff?
Oh no, he did solo stuff in between.
Okay.
Yeah. He actually put out 3 solo albums.
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure he did that stuff.
All with different names. It was G/Z/R, Geezer, and then GZR. Yeah, so this is the best Tony Martin album, I think. Eyewitness, Cross of Thorns, Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Immaculate Deception. Good songs.
Okay.
This one, it's still going with that power metal kind of vibe to it, which is crazy to think. This is in 1994. Like, you think of like Green Day and The Offspring were releasing some of their most famous work, and then you have this album that sounds very much like it was still recorded in the 80s.
It's probably another level to why people like me don't know a whole lot of Tony Martin's stuff, even though he had such a long-standing time with the band. It's just like there was a lot of other stuff going on at the time.
He was a good singer too.
Yeah, I feel bad.
Yeah, and they also put out Cross Purposes Live, and came with there was also a video too. So it was VHS. I almost said DVD. It wouldn't have been DVD yet, but yeah, that's actually a really great live performance. So if you ever want to see Tony Martin, cutting it live with Sabbath and doing all the Ozzy songs and everything that he had to do Ozzy songs. He had to do the Dio songs. He
So he had to be a talented motherfucker.
Yeah, and he nailed it. He was great, but he's overshadowed by all these other amazing singers. So what can you do? Tony the Cat Martin. Did you know that? His nickname?
The Cat?
The Cat. Tony the Cat Martin.
I was just going to comment on how Tony Martin is like a very non-metal name. I don't know. It's just he should be a tax attorney or something.
Yeah. Now we move on to Forbidden from 1995.
Oh, 1995.
Yep. Middle of the 90s. Geezer leaves again, leaving Naomi and Martin. This is the last album released under the name Black Sabbath until 13. This is considered a bad album, if not their worst. The first song, The Illusion of Power, is the worst song they ever recorded, mostly because of this, I don't know what it is. It's weird the way Tony Martin sings on it, and then there's this kind of awkward spoken section by Ice-T.
Are you fucking kidding?
Ice-T on a Sabbath record, yeah. And it's the first song. That's the problem. It's not that bad an album, but the first song is so weird and terrible. So
every person who was expecting Black Sabbath and heard that took the CD out of their Discman at the time and just broke it over their knee and said, "Fuck this bullshit."
This bullshit. Oh man, but Get a Grip, which is the second song on it, is awesome. Get a Grip is my favorite song on the album. So there's a lot of them that I would skip, but I don't think it's a mixed bag. Okay, it's a mixed bag. It is what it is.
Mixed bag of dog crap.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for a newbie, but
I shouldn't be putting broad sweeping generalizations on it like that.
What?
Give it a try.
Yeah, the production on it's real basic. It sounds simple. There's no there's no tricks on it or anything. It's just what it is. It's not awful, but it's nothing special either. Then we had some interesting things coming out during this time. There are two tribute albums, the Nativity in Black albums. The first one had White Zombie covering Children of the Grave, which is one of my favorite cover songs, period. Megadeth covering Paranoid. Bruce Dickinson covering Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Even have Rob Halford covering The Wizard. Sweet. With Geezer on bass and Bill Ward on drums. They sort of did a one-song...
I need to hear that.
Yeah.
Now.
They did a one-song band. They call them the Bullring Brummies. And then the second Nativity in Black, you have Ozzy singing N.I.B. with Primus. You have Godsmack covering Sweet Leaf. Megadeth.
That's a good one. That's one of my favorite covers.
That is a good one. Megadeth covering Never Say Die. System of a Down covering Snowblind, which is awesome. It sounds so different from the original. Slayer covering Hand of Doom. Pantera covering Electric Funeral. You even have some weird ones, you have Busta Rhymes and Ozzy collaborating on Iron Man.
I saw Busta Rhymes once.
Oh yeah, you were telling me some free concert or something?
It was free concert, College Day on the Parkway,
and
Philadelphia.
He was smoking
pot
weed on the Parkway.
On the Parkway.
Yeah. Actually, I saw Busta Rhymes one time, actually.
My story's better.
Your story's probably better, yeah, because it's on the Parkway. But there's also some really terrible covers on this album. There's a band called Head PE who covers Sabra Cadabra, and it's really weird. It's a really, really bizarre cover.
Interesting.
And then Monster Magnet covers Into the Void, which could have been awesome. But there's this whole thing about dinosaurs in Vietnam, and I'm like, what the fuck are they doing? Just sing the damn song.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were thinking with some of these songs, but you know, it's a mixed bag. But most of the ones I mentioned are all excellent. So both Nativity and Black albums are worth checking out. It's really interesting to hear a modern band covering old songs, and you
I
realize.
love it.
Yeah, the thing is you realize how timeless those old songs are, that they don't lose any kind of, there's no translation lost in it. Those are heavy songs that still stand up in today's world of metal. So anyway, Iommi went into the studio 1996 with Glenn Hughes again and recorded this great album which was never released until 2004, and they just called it the Depth Sessions. There's songs like Gone, From Another World, Fine, all great songs. So, yeah, I totally recommend the Depth Sessions. It's very simple. It's just a lot of good riffs, and, you know, they're not trying to pull off anything crazy with it. Glenn Hughes is a great singer, too, by the way. But this was released under the name Iommi, so there was no Sabbath part of this. And I often wonder, had it been released in 1996, would it have...
made him called it Black Sabbath?
Yeah, or would he have broken free from the name? For a little while, there was a bootleg of it where they called it the Eighth Star, you know, because the last one was the Seventh Star. Yeah. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Ozzy reunion chapter of the band. So Ozzy comes out of retirement, right? And he, I guess he was rejected from playing on Lollapalooza, like he was trying to play on Lollapalooza, but for some reason he...
It was a reactionary thing.
Yeah, he wasn't picked or whatever, so then Sharon said, why don't you do your own festival? We'll call it Ozfest, and that's what they did. I mean, the Ozfest went on for years and years and years. Every summer it was just like a whole day with like, you know, 20, sometimes up to, I think, 30 bands playing on multiple stages. Just a big, big festival where a lot of metal bands would get their start from playing on Ozfest. So anyway, the idea was they would ask Black Sabbath to join Ozzy up on stage. And for a while, they weren't using Bill Ward on drums because, you know, they didn't count him as part of the reunion because they didn't think he could cut it on the drums anymore.
Okay.
So they used Mike Borden, who was Ozzy's drummer. But at the end of this tour, for 2 gigs in their hometown in Birmingham, they had him on. So they recorded.
So why didn't they think he could cut it? Was this drinking or
I think he was
health,
cleaned up by then. I think, but yeah, he had a heart attack at one point.
Yeah,
and
I know he didn't. He had a rough go of it there with his health for a bit.
He did. I think that they just didn't ask him. I think that's really what it boiled down to. But you know, after this Ozfest tour, there were these 2 shows in Birmingham, their hometown, and they recorded it, and this was the first proper reunion. And even though this was recorded in 97, it was released in 98 as the Reunion album, just called Reunion.
Okay.
And it was the first live album that they officially released with Ozzy singing. And, you know, I talked about there was the Live at Last bootleg, but then they... or it wasn't even a bootleg. I think it was it was in stores, but it was unofficial. Like they didn't endorse it or something.
Okay.
I don't know what the story was on Live at Last.
It's probably something owned by the studio, and they released it as a studio, but the band
didn't. Now
that's speculation. I don't know.
Yeah, but they did officially release it later on under the name Past Lives, and there was more live clips added to it too. So it was like a big compilation. But anyway. The Reunion live album is my favorite live album ever because you can hear the crowd interaction, and it sounds like
the James Rolfe stamp of approval.
It sounds like you're actually at the concert, and I don't know what it is, but just like the bass and everything. If you turn that up loud, it sounds like you're there.
Right on.
The songs sound heavy, and they sound very good live. Like they sound like they they live up to everything that's going on in metal during this time. Like I said, the songs are not dated, and it captures the excitement of a band getting back together after such a long time. There's parts on the album where Ozzy's talking about and saying, you know what, like I'm really happy to be back with these guys, and there's something about it's very genuine. And it's the last time you'll ever hear Ozzy sing anything from the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album. They performed Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Spiral Architect. Another thing about the reunion album, there is 2 new tracks, Psycho Man and Selling My Soul. These were the first studio tracks with Ozzy since 1978. And I loved how these ones sound. I remember, this is about when I was first getting into Black Sabbath. So the radio was playing these a lot, and it was a big deal. And I love the modern production on it. I love the way they sound. There's definitely like a progression. Like they didn't just repeat what they've already done. They did something that would sound good for today, but still with that Sabbath signature vibe to it. On Selling My Soul, though, they replaced Bill with a drum machine. That's
Are you
something I
shitting
heard.
me?
Yeah, I guess they said his drumming was out of time or something, but that's another thing that.
They couldn't replace him with another physical human being.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, I never knew it. Like I could never tell by listening to it, but
Yeah.
that's apparently what happened. So then we have the Ozfest tours, where Sabbath started doing tours. Well, actually, first they did a big reunion tour with Pantera supporting, and I remember I was just a little late to the party there. Like that was when they came to the Philly Spectrum, and I remember they had to postpone that concert because Ozzy was sick.
Okay.
But the concert still happened, and I was just getting into Sabbath, so that's when I first started hearing about them and wanting to know more about the band. So then they came around again with the Ozfest '99 tour with Rob Zombie, Slayer, Godsmack, Primus, System of a Down, Fear Factory, and a bunch of others. That was a good lineup that year.
Did you go?
I was there, yeah. That was the first time I saw Sabbath.
You're a dick.
So after that, seemed like the next logical step would be to make a new album, right? Well, they already did those 2 new songs, so it seemed like, they're already on their way. Just record some more, and then they'll, do more like that, and they'll get there, right? Well, I mean, Ozzy released 3 solo albums before that would eventually happen.
Yeah.
Iommi released 3 solo albums, including the Depth Sessions, which was recorded in '96. And Geezer released 3 albums of his own, so they were all doing their own things, basically.
Yeah.
And then the TV show, The Osbournes, started up. So Ozzy was
the
definitely
90s.
keeping busy. Yeah, well,
that was the early
early 2000s.
2000s.
So basically, these guys are all busy. And the Ozfest was going on every year. Sometimes Ozzy even did a tour in the winter, like the Merry Mayhem tour with Rob Zombie.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Ozzy was always on tour, and finally, during Ozfest 2001, which had Sabbath again, Sabbath came back and played a new song, Scary Dreams. And this song, if you were at Ozfest 2001, you heard it. If you weren't there, you'll never hear it again. It's out there. It's a very rare recording, but it only exists as a bootleg. They never did a studio recording of this song, and it wasn't a great song. Like, it seemed like it needed a little bit of work, but it was really scary and doomy, and I think that it could have been a good Sabbath song if they finished it up. But, bottom line, it seemed like, okay, they're playing a new song. That probably means they're coming out with an album soon, right? Isn't that how it usually goes?
What a tease.
Nope, we were still off about 12 years. Well, Ozzy released Down to Earth. Iommi released the album Iommi, which featured a bunch of guest singers like Phil Anselmo, Billy Corgan, Serge Tankian, and even Ozzy and Bill Ward on a track called Who's Fooling Who. It's a very Sabbathy sounding track, so technically, is this a Black Sabbath song? Sure
Wow.
sounds, it's everybody but Geezer.
Yeah.
But by the way, the song that I think sticks out to me is with Dave Grohl singing, called "Goodbye Lament." It's a great demonstration
Lament.
of what?
Lament.
Goodbye Lament. Okay,
I
thanks.
would
But I think
assume that.
the way he sings it though is like lament, but whatever. It's a great demonstration of the power of Iommi's guitar tone. Like it devastates. Then he released Fused in 2005 with Glenn Hughes singing. There's some great songs on that, like Dopamine. Then there's the final Sabbath tours. Ozfest 2004 had Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. And there's a famous show, the one I was at, where Ozzy was sick and Rob Halford filled in for him. So he sang for Judas Priest and then followed it up with singing for Ozzy on Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ozfest 2005, they came around again, and this was the last tour with the four original members. Iron Maiden was the second headliner. There was an incident where Bruce Dickinson supposedly said something bad about Ozzy.
Yeah.
We were at one of those shows, and you said
I just remember there being like this vibe of him, like Bruce Dickinson is a very vocal dude to begin with. He doesn't really hold back his opinions for sure. But I just remember there being this vibe of like, I'm not appreciative of being on this tour, and like, it just kind of,
Really?
I don't remember verbatim what he said. I just remember him coming off kind of
Yeah.
like a dick.
I do remember he took some kind of shot at Ozzy doing his TV show or something. Like he was like, we don't need TV shows or something like that. I heard, but you know, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth because I don't know what was said. But
Yeah.
but there was this infamous moment on the tour where Sharon orchestrated some kind of immature retaliation where they would cut the sound on Iron Maiden's set and then they pelted them with eggs. So that turned into a huge disaster, obviously, and then Maiden was kicked off or left or whatever, and then on top of all that, Ozzy's voice was failing him a lot during this tour, so lots of shows were being canceled, and after this all fell apart. I would be surprised that there would ever be another Ozfest, but hey, it
Yeah.
went on. And their
I'll
final
interject. That paints Sharon very poorly. I've always been a huge Sharon Osbourne supporter, and you can hate me for it if you'd like. I think she has her moments where she's immature, and she's struggled with her own demons as well. But she saved Ozzy in a time of need and has been by his side for a long time through a lot of bullshit. So I think Sharon Osbourne is great. End of sermon.
Okay. So their last show, the final performance with the original four members of Black Sabbath was in 2005 at the UK Music Hall of Fame. In 2006, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but they didn't perform. Instead, it was a bunch of guest performers, and the final act was Metallica covering Hole in the Sky and Iron Man. It was great. So anyway, we're kind of past now the original lineup. Like it's over basically until who knows what would ever happen in the future. But anyway, Ozfest 2006 came around and Ozzy had less tour dates, and then 2007 they did it again, and then 2008 it was a one date in Texas, and there was no 2009. So basically Ozfest sort of like slowly faded away. But he brought it back in 2010 with Halford and Motley Crue, which we were at that one. It was great. Meanwhile, Ozzy's still been cranking out albums. There was Black Rain in 2007, which I think was one of his best recent works. And then in 2010, there was the album Scream. Funny that there was also a Tony Martin album called Scream.
That poor guy.
So now let's go back to the Iommi side of things. Black Sabbath, The Dio Years came out in 2007, and this is where the unthinkable happened. So it was a greatest hits album, which was focused on the Dio years, obviously, and there were 3 brand new songs on it. So Iommi got the old group back together, the Black Sabbath 2 lineup, Dio on vocals, Geezer on bass, and Vinny Appice on drums. They were called The Devil Cried, Shadow of the Wind, and Ear in the Wall. They were all equally great. It didn't even feel like time had passed. It seems like these could have been on the Dehumanizer album. Like I would have never thought that they would have gotten back together with Dio after all these years. So while we were waiting for one reunion to happen, we got another. So they go out on tour, and that's something that I never thought I'd live to see. The Mark II Black Sabbath with Dio live. So this was an unexpected surprise. This was a treat. Now, even though this was the same exact lineup that recorded Mob Rules and Dehumanizer, they changed the name of the band to Heaven and Hell. I understand why they did that, because since the Ozzy reunion and all the Ozfests, it would have been confusing to people. So it makes sense that they distinguished this version of Sabbath from the Ozzy version. And Heaven and Hell was the name of the first album they recorded with Dio, and Black Sabbath was the first one they recorded with Ozzy.
I never made that connection.
Oh, you never
clever
did?
bastard.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, that's why they did it. But it'll always be Black Sabbath to me. It's just a different version.
Yeah.
But another thing they did that sort of changed the attitude was that they scrapped any Ozzy songs from the set list. They only focused on Dio songs.
Yeah.
Songs that Dio sang on Black Sabbath albums, like From Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and Dehumanizer, as well as the new songs, which I was very much in favor of, because during all the Ozzy years, you'd never hear Ozzy sing anything that he didn't, originally record. So all these great songs just got, completely scrapped for so many years, and now it was a chance to finally hear them again and hear them live. So I think it was a very good choice that they split it up into like a different band. Like this is Heaven and Hell, and that's Black Sabbath. Also, the concerts got better. They had a lot of energy, so I feel like seeing them on stage, they were like a reborn band. The Devil You Know, 2009, this was the album I never expected to hear. And I was all for it, but I wasn't overly excited at first because first, like I said, I didn't expect it. I was happy they just got back together to do all the classics live, and those 3 tracks on the Dio years were like a bonus. And those 3 songs on the Dio years, I didn't think that they were anything that special. They were good, but they weren't mind-blowing. But then when I heard the album, when I heard The Devil You Know, I was blown the fuck away. Like, for the first time, I thought to myself, holy shit, I'm hearing new Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
And yes, it is a Heaven and Hell album, but I filed the CD on my shelf under B for Black Sabbath.
You rebel.
But, I mean, my favorite songs are The Bible Black.
Yeah, that's my favorite one on there for sure.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Angel.
Eating the Cannibals.
Eating the Cannibals and Neverwhere. So this is a really, really good album, and I feel like it got a little bit kind of buried, like it didn't get any radio play that I heard, and it was just
I
like...
think I remember.
It's,
You played the shit out of it, I remember.
Oh, I still play the shit out of it. Yeah, The Devil You Know is fucking awesome. So then out of nowhere, there's a lawsuit between Ozzy and Tony Iommi. So Ozzy was trying to sue Tony over the use of the Black Sabbath name, which totally seemed like a Sharon move to me, but whatever. There was a quote on...
You gotta hate on my Sharon.
No, it's fine, but it's just...
Probably was.
See, what pissed me off, there was a quote on Ozzy's site, and that was very insulting, and I'm going to paraphrase here. I don't remember the exact quote, but it said something like, Tony, I feel bad that I have to take this action against you, but my voice was what distinguished the band and made the band as successful as it was, and without me, the name Black Sabbath is in the toilet. Now, I am paraphrasing there, but he definitely said the name Black Sabbath was in the toilet. Like, you're going to discount all that great music they did in the 80s and early 90s and say that the name was in the toilet. And I don't know what caused the lawsuit after he had already changed the name to Heaven and Hell.
Yeah.
But I think it had something to do with merchandise or something, but it only took him that many years to take some kind of action. Now, I don't know what the final result of that lawsuit was, but I think Iommi still owns the Black Sabbath trademark, and that's, how I always felt about it is that Ozzy is Ozzy, but Iommi is Black Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic example of when, like, people who don't need the money fight over something that's monetary, and it's just, it just is so freaking silly, and why it had to happen after all these years is really sad. So, it's just my comment on it, but...
Yeah, I mean, they were touring with a great new album. It didn't have the name Black Sabbath. They weren't even playing Ozzy songs during the concert. So, like, I don't know what it instigated.
It's so trivial, who gives a shit, but...
Yeah.
Somebody did enough to make this. We don't know the other side of the story. We don't know, like, maybe it was something like that took a lot of money out of somebody's pocket or something, or there was something else that went on. We'll never know. So.
Yeah, but also where I said that the quote on Ozzy's site was real insulting. Actually, in his book, which his book came out before this was settled, but it is settled now. They've buried the hatchet. Yeah. But like at the end of the book, he does say something that's a lot more fair and a lot more sensible. He says in the book that the first two albums with Dio were pretty good, and that he just feels like he wished they would have called it Black Sabbath 2.
Yeah.
So
or called it Heaven and Hell back then too, like.
Yeah, like they should have in the first place, really. But it is what it is. But anyway,
it is what it is.
At this time, though, when this was going on, it was like, okay, they're never gonna do a reunion album with Ozzy. Like, there's never ever going to be another Black Sabbath album with Ozzy. And then, after all that, Dio was diagnosed with stomach cancer in late 2009, and he died in May of 2010. Yeah. And the thing about Dio, he was brave till the very end.
Well, sure, yeah. Like I said earlier, he rocked it till his grave. He rocked himself to the grave.
Flipping his devil horns to the cancer. I mean, I actually didn't even think he was going to die. Like, I knew how serious it was, but like, I almost felt like, how could this happen? And that's the thing, with cancer, is just that, like, sometimes it takes an entertainer to make you aware to something, because, I mean, I knew cancer is really serious and lots of people die because of it, but I haven't known anybody, like, personally, like, I've never had a family member or a friend have it.
My grandmother died of cancer.
Yeah, so sometimes it takes somebody to make it aware. Like for example, Parkinson's disease with Michael J. Fox. I never heard of. I didn't know what Parkinson's disease was.
It takes somebody famous or well known to champion, a cause of finding cures for something that you don't necessarily know a lot about.
Like, I donated to the Stand Up and Shout Cancer Fund, and that's when it hit me, when I realized, like, you know what? It really did take, like, an entertainer to make it, to make you more aware, and that way he's a hero.
Yeah, and it also, Wendy, his wife, and other people like Eddie Trunk and stuff have said, people who knew him really well, that if he had taken more proactive measures, gotten his colon screenings and whatnot, he probably wouldn't have died. So unfortunately it took his death for people to realize that they need to go get their screenings and they need to, keep on top of stuff like that. So hopefully his death, he has saved a lot of lives, hopefully.
Yeah. And then moving on from that, as far as Black Sabbath was concerned, if there would ever be any kind of lineup of Black Sabbath, like, what would happen? At this point, it just seemed like Black Sabbath was dead. Like, that's the way I thought of it. Like, unless they did some other kind of reunion with another singer, like Tony Martin or something, like, there's just no way it could continue.
Yeah.
And actually, what did happen, though, he reunited with Ian Gillan, which, was kind of... Tony Iommi.
Okay.
Which seemed kind of unexpected, but it was just for a there was a a music school in Armenia that was damaged by an earthquake. So this was actually to raise money for that.
Okay, yeah, I remember this now.
Yeah, and on these two tracks they recorded was Ian Gillan on vocals, and they had Jason Newsted on bass, Nico McBrain on drums from Iron Maiden. So it was a super group kind of thing. Oh, John Lord was on keyboards. Who John Lord is another one who's gone now. So rest in peace, John Lord. So I mean, yeah, the two tracks were called "Out of My Mind" and "Holy Water," and they were pretty good. It was good to hear, you know, Gillan singing over Iommi's guitar again after all these years. But it wasn't called, there was no real name for the band. The little album was called Who Cares?
Okay.
But this wasn't any kind of chapter in Sabbath or anything like that. It was just, this was a totally different kind of thing. So basically it seemed like Iommi was getting around to reuniting with all the other Sabbath singers. Like the stuff he did with Glenn Hughes and now Ian Gillan, like all this going on, it just seemed like, you know, he's done everything's come full circle, right? Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the end. And even Geezer made a comment on his site saying that there would never be another Sabbath reunion with all 4 original members. He was right about that part. I think the way he worded it, I think he was right. But it just seemed like nobody was into it. Like Ozzy.
Just seemed like it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, whenever Ozzy was interviewed, he was just like, oh, like, you know, maybe it'll happen, but it's just, it just seemed very unlikely. Well, then on November 11th, 2011, which was Metal Day because of the 11-11-11 looking like devil horns, I guess.
And our anniversary.
It was our anniversary. And all 4 original members appeared at a press conference at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles to make some big announcement. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, okay, they're going to announce they're going to go on tour again. I'm like, that's fine. You know, it's like a lot of younger generations that never got the chance to see them will get to see them. Mm-hmm. But they're going to play the same songs. Like, they're going to play NIB, Black Sabbath, Paranoid, War Pigs, Iron Man, Children of the Grave. You know, like, I know what they're going to do, right? Then you tell me that Kelly Osbourne tweets something like, new Sabbath album. And I'm like, no, that's just a joke. And then, like, I started hearing that it was real. I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. And
I'm sorry that's how I broke it to you.
That is it.
Kelly Osbourne tweeted something.
So I look at the YouTube video, like, up the press conference.
I follow her because she has an adorable dog, and she posts pictures of the dog. Anyway, go on.
So I watched the press conference on YouTube, and I'm like, this is unfucking believable. This album that I've been waiting for all these years is now, like, just when I was 100% convinced it would not happen, it's now happening. Rick Rubin is producing it, you know, who did Death Magnetic, Metallica. So I'm like, okay, this is happening. And then guess what happens? Bill Ward drops out.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh boy. All right. So there's been different sides of the story, but for whatever reason it didn't work out. Yeah. Bill Ward was very open about it. He made some statements on his website. Basically said he got a real shitty contract, and he said it was an unsignable contract, and basically they needed to get it worked out. And Bill Ward felt really bad. Like, he really wanted to do this. So I feel like, you know, with all the pressure, him not doing it, there was probably a good reason then. Yeah. It was probably for the best that he backed out. But there's other sides of the story. Like, Geezer had a completely different take on it. Like, he made a response, and then Bill even made a response back to Geezer. Okay. And Geezer was saying, like, that Bill's demands were unreasonable, and, you know, it seemed like there was some kind of misunderstanding in the middle of all this, and it's a shame they couldn't get all the legal stuff figured out before they made this press conference, but, you know. But then Ozzy has been saying in interviews lately that the reason they didn't use Bill was because he couldn't cut it on the drums. He said that he had sticky notes all over his drum kit because he couldn't remember how to play any of the songs, and he just wasn't up to speed. And, that's the same thing that happened back in 97 when they replaced him with a drum machine and
Yeah.
didn't... And if you stop and think about it, when was the last time Bill Ward ever played a new song that was not one of the classics with them? So it's kind of like, it's a lot for him to learn maybe. So I can see that as being possible,
Yeah.
But basically there's lots of different stories to it, and for whatever reason it just didn't work out. And I know a lot of people are upset about it, and a lot of people have this all or nothing mindset, saying that it's not Black Sabbath without Bill, and like
Yeah.
who don't even, people who probably don't even want to listen to the album just because Bill Ward isn't on it. And like, can you count how many different lineups of Black Sabbath there have been during the past 40 years? We all know the classic lineup is Tony, Ozzy, Geezer, and Bill. We can all agree with that, right? That's the classic lineup. But we've also had some great quality music with just Tony, Geezer, and Bill, Tony and Geezer, and just Tony. So now we have Tony, Geezer, and Ozzy. So it's just a different combination and a new chapter for Black Sabbath. I'm as disappointed as everybody else is that this didn't work out to be a full reunion. But it's amazing that this album is coming into existence at all. It's 3/4 of original members, the most that we've had since 1983's Born Again. So come on, people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like, I would think that with these types of people who have so much money and so, there's such a history, and they're all like got a toe in the grave, and it's like, couldn't you have enough perspective to just get over the legal bullshit and figure it out, especially like you said, before announcing that it's going to be all four, like that was a bonehead move. Like, you think after all these years of being a band, they would have gotten at least that press aspect of it under control. Like a lot of things aren't necessarily the exact combination of what we'd love it to be, but I think, I think it was Eddie Trunk on the last, the first episode of the Metal Show for this season, how he said, he's like, I wish it was all four members, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to buy the album. That doesn't mean you won't see me at the shows. It's something I'm going to go see and I'm going to want to listen to, so I can't come out and be 100% against it.
Yeah. And also another thing, keep in mind, something a lot more serious than, Bill Ward not being in the band is another complication with this whole reunion thing that happened is Tony got cancer.
Yeah.
So, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like, I mean, he's been getting treated and he's doing well, but I wonder if the whole reason this reunion might have happened is because he might have got himself checked after what happened with Dio, and maybe he was diagnosed before it went public, or it could have happened after the press conference. I'm not sure. I'm just saying maybe like that these guys all got a reality check and were like, hey, let's make this new album before we all die. Even Ozzy said that in one of his recent interviews. He said, it's now or never. We're all sitting around getting old. Like, if we're going to do it, let's just put all the past behind us. And so, which I think is just a great story of how this album came out, because it's just a bunch of guys putting their differences aside. Tony Iommi saying, fuck the cancer, I'm going to do this album. And scheduling tours around his chemotherapy treatments and everything that's going on. It's just so unlikely that this album would happen, and it fucking happened.
Yeah.
Okay, now 13 is here, and I'm sitting here trying to think, what do I say? Because I'm so speechless. Imagine you're walking down the street and a giant robot comes along, and then a dragon swoops down from the sky and starts engaging in battle with it. Will you be critical of what you witnessed? Are you going to like analyze it and say, I'm not sure how the dragon's fire was able to inflict so much damage on the robot, but the lasers didn't affect the dragon much? Is that what you'd say? Or would you say, holy fucking shit, I just saw a dragon fighting a robot? I just heard a new fucking Black Sabbath album. The first one released in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So I'm not really in a critical mood. The title...
Well said, sir.
All right. Well, I mean, the title, one thing I have to say, 13, it's the lousiest title since Volume 4. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, it doesn't have any significance. It's not their 13th album. There's no apparent significance, let me say. I mean, it was released in 2013, but I don't know. But it doesn't, mean anything to me, just the name 13 alone.
Yeah.
It's not original. Megadeth used it a few years ago. I mean, it was spelled out, but why call it 13? I think they could have come up with something better, but it's just a title. It's the least thing I would care about.
Yeah.
So we heard the 8 tracks. There's because the iTunes streamed it. They're going to on Tuesday. I already have the album pre-ordered as well, so that on the deluxe edition you get 3 more tracks, and then if you get the Best Buy exclusive one, you get another track yet. So there's 4 more tracks that we haven't heard, but I'm getting it. I have it and I'm listening to it right now as you're probably listening to this. Brad Wilkes is the studio drummer, by the way. Ozzy's drummer Tommy is Tommy Clufidis. He's on the tour, but
Okay.
Brad Wilkes is actually really good on the drums. Like, it sounds like something that Bill might have done if they had him. So it's great. So what do you think of the album as a whole?
Like you said, it's hard to get over the epicness of what you're listening to. So that's like the first thing. But yeah, it's awesome. I only listened to the first 8 tracks once. So it's that's another level of why it's hard to put any sort of criticism on it. It's like I haven't really had a lot of time to sit with it for any amount of time. But it's got like an early Sabbath sound to it, which is awesome.
It does.
There's some great songs on it. The first release single, "God Is Dead," is probably still my favorite one on it. It's a great song.
Because God Is Dead, we've had the most time to listen to. It's kind of a strange choice that the longest song on the album is the one they put out as a single. I actually heard the radio edit of it, though, because they played it on MMR. They cut it down a lot, which some of it I was in favor of cutting down. Like, okay, I can understand it's for the radio. But they cut out Tony's guitar solo, which is a short solo to begin with. But I was like, oh, come on, don't cut that part out. God Is Dead, it's a 9-minute song. The first 6 minutes kind of drag a bit, but it's grown on me a lot since I've listened to it. So I really love the build-up. But it's 6 minutes that it takes its time, but the last 3 minutes, it's so awesome that the first time I even heard it, I couldn't even sit still. It has like this hole in the sky kind of riff going on, and
I remember when you got like the first couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And we listened to that, and it was like, oh, you motherfuckers.
I was like, listen to this. They just released 30 seconds of the song. Yeah, like I still can't listen to that without bobbing my head every time I hear it. As far as all the other songs go, End of the Beginning, I saw when they played it on CSI, which was a really strange cameo, but
I didn't see that, but I did hear about it and told you about it.
It was weird. It was just so out of place, but it was awesome. End of the Beginning has this really creepy intro. It's another slow build up, and Loner is just like Loner is stuck in my head. Like no bullshit. Good. Like it just lays down a riff and sits on that riff and instantly got me hooked. Like I never get tired of hearing it.
Cool.
But like I said, this is early impression. Like I'm going to be listening to it a lot. I'm sure that this whole album will grow on us. Zeitgeist reminds me a lot of Planet Caravan in a good way. And actually, I read lots of comments online where everybody's comparing it to Planet Caravan, so that's not at all out of place. It has the echoey vocal effects, the jazzy guitar doodles, and the bongo drums. It's not an exact copy of Planet Caravan. It's a totally different song, but it sounds...
Same vibe.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent, very spacey. Most important, it just sounds a lot like something Sabbath would have put on one of their early records, like that kind of fluff filler they put in between songs. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Age of Reason has a great solo on it. Live Forever has this riff that almost sounds like something that might have been on Born Again that Slash would have kind of replicated a little bit. Like it has a very
Okay.
slashy kind of riff going on, like a Rocket Queen kind of, thing. Um, Damaged Soul.
That was my favorite on the album,
Wow.
aside from God is Dead.
Damaged Soul was amazing. It's this really bluesy song.
Mm-hmm.
There's a harmonica in it. It reminds me of The Warning
Yeah.
with this long, long guitar solo. So they truly went back to their roots. Like I didn't even know that they were going to go like that far back. Like I was like, okay, I understand they're trying to recapture the old Sabbath sound,
Mm-hmm.
but this is almost literal. Like they went back to the first album with this.
Yeah.
And in a good way. And even with Dear Father, it ends with The Storm, kind of like how the first album began.
Yeah.
Actually, exactly how the first album began. And that's the 8th track. It's the last one if you don't count the bonus tracks.
Uh-huh. As a comment on the overall album, I think it sounds a lot like early Sabbath recordings, with the exception of Ozzy's vocals sound a lot like his solo stuff to me. I think it's a kind of a polished sound like his stuff that he did.
You think like just over the years his vocals have gotten more polished?
Yeah, or that they lay down the tracks that way and maybe put like filters over it a little bit.
Yeah, Ozzy's voice, I mean, has changed over all the years, so it's an aging voice now. But yeah, he kind of does sound more like crisp, like it just kind of
Polished, crisp.
yeah, it's very, it's good. I mean, I love the how creepy his voice can get. And really, like, just hearing Ozzy's voice over Iommi's guitar, it's like those two sounds needed to be together. Like, that guitar and that voice, it's like, it makes me wonder why they were apart for so long.
Yeah.
It's just like bread and butter. The only thing I have to say is that it's kind of self-aware that they almost went over the old Black Sabbath blueprint and kind of followed that because they knew how much hype there was about this. So it was like, okay, let's make sure we satisfy everybody who's been waiting for a new Sabbath album. And they did. Like, it totally brings you back to everything you want it to be. But I don't think... The only negative thing I can say is just that it doesn't become anything more, really. It's a nostalgic throwback. It doesn't really break any new grounds, but what could it? What could it do at this point? There's been everything.
God, only imagine, like, say they came out with something really different, like, you can only imagine what the backlash would be.
Yeah.
And everybody's panties would be in a twist.
Yeah, like there was clearly a lot of anticipation. Ozzy said that this is the most important album of his career. I guess when you're the champions, you have to keep proving it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So, 13, it sounds pretty damn good.
It's good.
Black Sabbath is back. Actually, we totally forgot how we got into the band. I'll briefly just mention a story that I have. Is that this is how I got into Black Sabbath. This was back in the '90s, late '90s, and I got one of my friends got their driver's license, and that's kind of a big deal when that happens.
Yeah.
Like one of your friends now they have their own car and everything, and see, Black Sabbath brings me back to that night when you're driving around with your friends, like for the first time, and it's like this liberation, this like freedom, like, oh my God, we're in a car with no adults. We are just driving around. And so we go to the mall, and on the way there, there's a friend named Alex and a friend who we'll call Kirk. And Kirk is very much, like a metal fan like me, but he was a kind of a, we were novice. We didn't know that much about metal yet, and we kind of knew about Black Sabbath, but we didn't really like know anything about him. You know what I mean? Like we knew of the riff to Iron Man because of Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
And my friend Alex hated it. He was like, "Oh, I hate when Beavis and Butthead do that. Like I hate Iron Man." Like he just had this like this malfunction with Iron Man. Like he just didn't want to hear it and hated it to death. And then, so we go into the mall, and unknowingly Kirk bought the Paranoid album while we were in the mall. we go back to the car after we're leaving.
Unknowingly, how? What did he just like somebody buy it for him?
No,
and
he
just
went.
took it or something?
Oh no, he did it secret. I meant.
Oh,
He's playing a joke.
behind
He's playing.
Alex's back.
Yes. Anyway, here's what happens. We leave the mall. He goes, "Hey Alex, give me your keys. I'll start up the car." And he's like, "All right." So he throws in the keys, and Kirk goes running out to the parking lot, starts up Alex's car. We're walking back. All of a sudden, Iron Man just comes blasting out of the car, and Alex is like, "Oh, what the fuck?" and starts running to the car and like to take the CD out of the the CD player and
a CD
like,
back then.
He was like one of the first friends I knew to have like a CD player too. I mean, yeah, a lot of people had them, but it was like
In the
it
car.
was starting to catch on. Yeah. I mean,
Classic.
it wasn't as common. No, I think he had some kind of like adapter. It was like connected to. It was like an external one. It wasn't like actually in the dashboard.
Boombox in my passenger seat. Go on.
So that of course was what happened. And then later on, I said to Kirk, "Hey, let me borrow that album. That sounds pretty good." And I listened to it, and I was like, "Holy crap, this is so fucking good." And then from that point on, I continuously got more and more into Black Sabbath, and yeah, that was me. What about you?
Practical joke. Go on.
Practical joke, and that's the way Sabbath would have wanted it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have an answer for this question. As I've said before, I was like the classic rock girl amongst my social circle, and so it took a while for me to get into things that are considered classically metal. So I don't have a moment in time. I don't have a story. I don't really remember. Of course, I heard the radio stuff, and I knew what Black Sabbath was for as long as I can remember knowing about music, but I don't have a moment in time, so I won't waste any more time even trying to come up with one.
All right, now how many times have we seen them live? Now, you've seen them live with me sometimes, so you could just jump in when we get here.
Yeah.
Very briefly, so basically I've seen Black Sabbath with all 4 original members 3 times. Ozfest 99, Ozfest 2001 when they played Scary Dreams, and Ozfest 2005.
I was there for the Ozfest 2005, one of those. So.
Yeah.
And that was good.
It was. And then I saw them with Rob Halford singing in place of Ozzy, which was at the Camden, New Jersey show in 2004.
I knew you. You were very, very drunk.
Yeah, that was just, something that happens. But I was like, it was so disorienting to see Rob Halford singing for Sabbath. I was like, whoa, what happened to Ozzy? He lost a lot of hair.
Yeah. I just remember you called me on your way home from that show.
We had just met like that.
Just met, yeah.
So then I saw them with the Heaven and Hell lineup twice. In 2007 at the Spectrum. That was one of the last shows, maybe the last I saw on the Spectrum. One of the last.
Then how was I?
See, I went to that one by myself because I think for some reason...
I graduated college that year. Maybe I had a lot on my plate.
Yeah, I really don't remember why you didn't come to that one, but that was just me. But you saw them in 2008 with me.
Yeah.
On the Metal Masters tour with Judas Priest and Motorhead.
I put this one, for those of you who do follow the Mrs. Nerd stuff, and when I did my top concerts, I put this up there for sure. This was one of the best shows that I've ever been to in my life.
It was one of the closest I've ever been able to get to the stage during, at the Camden, New Jersey Shit Center.
Yeah. We had the best seats we've ever had. Probably any show, but definitely at that venue. And seeing Dio before he passed was amazing, and he sounded great, and it was in the lineup of that tour was it was just all around awesome.
It really was. And then I'm still to this day kicking myself in the ass. I almost went to their final show with Dio, the final show that Dio ever did. It was in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and I almost went to that, and I was too busy, and for whatever, I was just like, I had a lot of work to do that weekend, and I just didn't.
Yeah, I remember mulling it over. Like, we kept talking about we should make a weekend of it or something. Yeah, no.
Who would have thought that would have been, one of their last shows? And that's when they were supporting the album, The Devil You Know. So they were playing a lot of those new songs like Bible Black. I've seen Ozzy 4 times. No, I'm sorry, I've seen him 5 times live. Wow. Merry Mayhem Tour 2001 with Rob Zombie. Ozfest 2002. Ozfest 2007. You came to that one with me.
Mm-hmm.
The 2007 Ozfest was the only Ozfest where I wasn't sweating my balls off. It was rainy and cold.
Yeah, and that was the one where if you bought the album, you got like a free ticket. So
It
we
was
just
free.
kind of like, yeah, we just kind of like decided we didn't like any of the other bands, or didn't really feel like we liked them enough to go.
It was a
so
rainy day.
It was rainy. We didn't want to pay for the parking, whatever, and just were like, what, and then decided last minute, we're like, you know what, let's just go see Ozzy at the end. The ticket's free. What the hell? And yeah, we just kind of like moseyed in. It was free. It was nice weather. Well, nice in that we weren't sweating. And
Yeah.
It was.
The only Ozfest I've ever been to where I was only there for Ozzy.
Yeah.
And that was when he was supporting the Black Rain album. And that was great. I thought that was an awesome album. Then in 2008, we saw him with Rob Zombie.
You know, we talked about this one in the Zombie podcast.
Yeah, wasn't that the Spectrum, actually?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. That was a great show.
That's where I saw Rob Zombie coming out of the bathroom.
Yeah, that's right. Ozfest 2010, which was great. And
Twas?
And I got to go that one with my old friend Alex, who came with us. He was the guy who hated Iron Man. You remember all that? Yeah. Actually, I mean, he's been past that, by the way. You know, he doesn't hate anything. He likes pretty much everything now, I think. Yeah. But so then that's all the shows I've seen related to Sabbath and Ozzy. But also I've seen 2 tribute bands before. There's a tribute band that played in the Philly area before. I don't know if they're still playing or not, but they were awesome. They were called Sabra and the singer was looked the part. Also, he looked like Ozzy, sounded just like him. They all dressed the part. They did a whole show. It was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. There's also another band called After Forever, and they were great too. They didn't play it all up like with the big theatrical thing, but they were they sounded just like Sabbath. And then I've been to some autograph signings. I have every autograph from every member of the band except for Bill Ward. The first time was I got a picture with Ozzy. He was only doing photos. Mm-hmm. That was in support of the Down to Earth album. And what was really weird about this, what was really epic, it was one of the first times I ever met a celebrity in person. Mm-hmm. And here I am in this line, and you have to you had to show up 2 different nights. You had to get a wristband and wear it for the whole week. You buy the album at midnight, and I remember I had to take 2 trains and a bus to get back and forth, and it was kind of like an adventure, and it was a whole week project to jump through all these hurdles just to be able to get 1 second with Ozzy and get a picture. But we're waiting in line outside. Ozzy shows up inside of a van, and there's a V-shaped flock of guys on motorcycles coming in. So he's got all these motorcycles around him, and then he comes out, and they had a speaker all set up, so he came out and talked to the crowd, and he's like,
that's cool.
Go fucking crazy, and then people started moshing almost in this line, like everybody was kind of funneling into this building where these pictures were going to get taken.
Yeah.
And Ozzy was in a throne. He was just sitting there in a throne.
Dance, my little minions, dance.
It was just weird. And then it was a Polaroid picture. So there was somebody just taking a Polaroid, and it was the last Polaroid picture I ever had. Does anybody, even the younger people, even know what a Polaroid picture is?
Yeah, only because shake it like a Polaroid picture.
Oh yeah. So anyway, I also recently, when he came out with the book I Am Ozzy, I got his autograph there.
Yeah,
so
I was with you for that one. I remember.
Yeah. Then Geezer and Tony, I met at the Ozfest 2005. They were doing I
remember that
a CD signing because they each came out with their solo album at that time. I only had Fused, and Geezer had On Work, and it was weird because there were 2 lines for both of them. I bought both. I obviously wanted to get both. I didn't care if I had to stand 2 lines. I'll do whatever. Well, for some reason, I must have been the only person who got both, and they didn't know which line to put me in. So they just put me to the front. And I thought I'd have all that time to unwrap the CD from the packaging and everything. And here I am right in front of Tony and Geezer with both the albums trying to like take the packaging off and everything.
Like, who's this fucker?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And Geezer was really cool. He was just like, hey, what's up, man? And, you know, I shook his hand and everything. Tony was real distant. He was just kind of like, didn't even look at you.
Yeah.
But Geezer was like very, very friendly. Okay, so now we're going to wrap up this really long podcast. And we're going to just talk about any recommendations. So if you're just getting into Black Sabbath, what are the essentials? Now, I'm going to first just reel off the books that I have. Like, if you want to soak up a lot of information, there's Tony Iommi's book, which is called Iron Man. There's Ozzy's book, which we've mentioned, I Am Ozzy.
Yeah, that's my particular favorite one. You think Ozzy wrote a book and you're like, a man who can hardly utter a coherent sentence wrote a book? Really? And it's good? But he does say in the very beginning that, like, he dictated it to somebody and they typed it out for him and kind of put his stories together. But just reading
It's all
you
from
can,
his brain.
Yeah, it's definitely all from his brain. You can hear his voice, like, even as you're reading it. So, and it's just amazing stories, and it's really funny.
Yeah.
And
Funny and sad, everything.
read it.
It's actually, it might even be the best book I ever read in my life because the stories are just so insane and like, just the emotional roller coaster ride that he's been through. It's just, it's a very, very
It's one of the
good,
best biographies I've ever read.
what a life he had. Then there's Never Say Die, which is a book by it's like in a series I think called Rock Detector, and it's just called Black Sabbath Never Say Die, and it's about all the history of the band after Ozzy. So it's all about the never say die attitude that they had to keep moving forward despite of all this trouble. Then there's the Black Sabbath FAQ by Martin Popoff, and it's actually not an FAQ at all. It's more about I would call it an RAQ, rarely asked questions, because it's just it's the nitty gritty, like all the fine details and all kinds of trivial stuff. Lots of good stuff. That I'd recommend more for if you're a real hardcore fan. Now, as far as music, like which of their albums would you recommend to a newcomer?
I would do like some sort of a greatest hits or something like that. Like, you know, they're the fathers of metal, so you got to know the hits before you dig into the deeper cuts. That's my small opinion on that.
Yeah, you'd have to go over a lot of their albums to get everything. It's really impossible. How do you recommend like something new? I mean, greatest hits, that's the way most people would start out with any band, really. So that's very fair. I would just say, if I'm giving a broader stroke, I would say get the first 6 albums by Ozzy and then the first 2 Dio albums.
Yeah.
But if I was really hard pressed, I would say, okay, start with Paranoid.
Yeah.
That's the best one. And then,
if I was hard pressed, I agree. But
yeah, and a very close second to that, Master of Reality. I would say those 2 albums are mandatory. You have to hear those both.
Okay.
And then also, as far as like performances goes, like it's as much as it's important to hear those albums, you should really see the footage from their concert from Paris in 1970. It's never been released officially, I don't think, but it's out there. You can probably see it on YouTube. It is like that concert, I think, totally. It shows you exactly what Sabbath was all about when they were in their prime. And yeah.
The one that I would recommend that's not necessarily all about Sabbath, but definitely check out the Metal Evolution series. That really goes into the history of metal, and Black Sabbath being such a huge part of that, they're a huge part of that series. So that would give you a great overview. As
VH1
well as
classic, and it's on DVD now.
And as far as like interviews and stuff go, check out the guys on that metal show. Many of them from different eras of the band have been on that show. And Eddie Trunk has said many times how he was a close personal friend of Ronnie James Dio too. So he always brings him up and stuff like that. So that's a good segue into the last bit here. We're going to go into our That Metal Show Top 5, and this week we have Top 5 guitar players this week, like we do this weekly.
Yeah.
This
This is
time...
from episode 607.
607,
Season
all right.
6, episode 7. Their top 5. Number 5, Randy Rhoads. Number 4, Ace Frehley. Number 3, Dimebag Darrell. Number 2, Eddie Van Halen. And number 1, Tony Iommi. Okay, so what would you switch out? What would your personal picks be?
I guess with like Eddie Van Halen and stuff, they weren't going with a classic like metal lineup or anything, and so then I don't know why on earth they left out 3, 4, in my opinion, of the greatest guitar players ever. I'll go backwards, I guess.
Yeah.
Eric Clapton, I know he's not metal, he's hardly hard rock even, but like Eric Clapton is always mentioned as one of the greatest guitar players, and I agree. Jimi fucking Hendrix, I mean, like, that's number 4 on my list. Like, do I need to even explain? And even if they were going with a very classic metal lineup, where is Angus? Angus is my number 3, Angus Young, AC/DC.
Yeah.
And then... I put Tony's number 2, real close number 2, because in my heart, Jimmy Page will always be number 1. So I didn't really go through that very clearly, but my number 1 is Jimmy Page, number 2, Tony Iommi, number 3, Angus Young, number 4, Jimi Hendrix, number 5, Eric Clapton.
Yeah, so mine, number 5, Kirk Hammett. Number 4, yeah.
I forgot Kirk.
You know, I gotta say, this has been a really hard list. Like, the top 5 guitar players, like, how do you even do that? It's so hard to pick 5.
I feel like I genuinely just felt really, really, really bad that I left out Kirk.
Oh.
Like he's gonna find out
you know
somehow.
What? The thing is, he was dueling for that number 5 spot with Slash for a while in my head, and then
fucking Slash.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
No, you know what? Let me just talk about my honorable mentions before I even get to my 5 then, because
yeah, I mean I had a few of those too, but go on.
Because I mean I was like, okay, Buckethead, like I gotta put Buckethead, but I'm like, you know, there's so many. Dimebag Darrell, of course. Dave Mustaine, Slash, and then of course again you put Jimi Hendrix. I was so close to putting Jimi Hendrix, but I just thought Jimi Hendrix is like on a whole other level almost. It's just And I figured, well,
I mean, I use that as my rationale, is like why they picked, like the Metal Show picked the way they did. Like
Yeah, 'cause
they
it wasn't
leave out
just
Jimi
metal.
Hendrix and Jimmy Page like on purpose, but if they left out, if they're trying to just go with like a metal lineup, then they left out Angus and
well, they
like
put Ace
Kirk and
Frehley
Slash
from
and
Kiss,
everybody.
and it's like that's not metal. You know, it's like it's just like if you're going like hard rock and metal, then
It's a hard list to make, for sure.
It's very hard. So what I ended up with, number 5, Kirk Hammett, undeniably, he's amazing.
Yeah.
Number 4, Angus Young, which almost feels like, why isn't Angus Young higher up on my list? Because he's such an iconic guitar player.
Yeah.
I mean, not only is an amazing player, but just like as a performer, like the stuff he does on stage, all his on-stage antics. But then we're up to my top 3 now, and basically I had to pick the 3 from the holy 3 of the 1970, like turn of the decade. Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple, and then number 2, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, and number 1, Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. So
It's a good list.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have Kirk and Ritchie, which I totally forgot about. Slash, forgot about. You know, Dave Mustaine earned his spot, like in at least an honorable mention. Yeah, and then Dimebag, yeah, for sure. It's a hard list to make. And Eddie Van Halen, you know, like I'll give him Eddie Van Halen too on the that Metal Show top 5.
Randy Rhoads, I mean Zach Wilde, I mean like there's so many.
They didn't have bad picks. It's just it's a very arbitrary in a way. Like they're 5. Like they're all great guitar players. I won't say they're not, but.
So anyway, that is Audio Slaughter, and wow, that was a rush.
Okay.
So,
it's been real. First postpartum Audio Slaughter in the bag.
yeah.
Rock on.
All right. Listen to 13. That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah.